pages or 30, I guess it was 30 pages that went up last night. But I changed his message a little bit just to protect him because he's meeting today with a representative of the Prime Minister of Japan and also one of the heads of the Japanese mafia. And the Japanese mafia may not like being mentioned too much. So that's why I didn't mention anybody by name, and I'd appreciate your not mentioning any of our Japanese agent names either. But that's the reason I decided to put the chapter up. The real reason, because I knew we could strike while the iron is hot, because Fukushima is melting down now, and they've announced they're not going to be able to stop it this time. And so Japan has a real problem, is they cannot generate enough electricity to go on, and they're building a cost-prohibitive dam to get hydroelectric. But their only choice in the short term to keep the lights on is propane or natural gas. And now China and Japan are having a tiff about some islands that have vast quantities of natural gas that I compared in fiction to the vast quantities of methane that are in reserves inside Hillary Clinton. David, over to you.
Okay, Phil. Well, today being my birthday, I want to stretch the collective forensic skills of the team and challenge you to come up with the name of a person that could not be more appropriate given the weapons available, and they're essentially defensive weapons, available to an octopus. So who am I talking about?
Inkster.
Now, is that not amazing that Inkster, Norman Inkster, really belongs, because he's still alive, as one of the four male tendrils of the octopus. But if you look at the date of his birth, which I think is back in the late 30s.
39.
Okay, he would be a contemporary, right, of General Alexander Haig. When was Alexander Haig born? Over to you.
I'm busy eating dessert, David. Somebody else will have to solve all these problems. But watch how fast the world's most lethal, whatever it's called, chat room puts up the date of. Jack Mack already got Inkster just as I did. But Jack Mack, would you find out when Alexander Haig, who's a traitor and a draft dodger, and who in chapter 24, it is alleged in chapter 24 that Alexander Haig participated in the killing of JFK. And of course, since Alexander Haig is deader than a carp, he will not object. So Jack Mack, could you help me out? Go ahead, David, over to you.
Okay, so the post that went out yesterday night under your rubric, let's say it reads as follows. And I think here, Field, that we have the Holy Grail, if that's the right word, because we've often talked about the controlling mind or the mens rea, and it's absolutely futile to go after an entity, let's say the Illuminati, if there is no identifiable location for the controlling mind that you can haul into court and take them apart in court, either with a civil action claim for damages or a criminal action where a jury has to find beyond reasonable doubt. So when we go after the Bullingdon Club or the Illuminati or the banksters or whatever, we can't bring them into court with a case in either world, a civil or criminal. Now we've got the entity, and it is the foreign fugitives file set up by your sister and Norman Inkster within the Department of Justice in 1987.
Hey, David, can I break in?
Yes.
I know you never read the laborious, voluminous issues that I put up every 48 hours, but in chapter 24, knowing that Norman David Inkster might be offended by having a gigantic spotlight placed on his verminous, truthful past, I gave him two pseudonyms. And can you think of any word that you've been using consistently for the last 6 years that rhymes with Inkster almost? And think of snapper.
Sphincter.
Yeah, Inkster, and I called him Finkster, and I called him Sphincter. In fact, he probably, next to Hillary Clinton and Barry Swatero, chorizo boy. These are probably three of the biggest or the most widely known anuses in the world. I guess is anuses plural for anus, or would it be ani?
Well, the Queen said, I think, in one particular year when there was talk about the tampons floating around in the toilet bowl or something, that this was an anus horribilis, but that's a different kind of anus.
Oh,
I think it's ani.
I have a woman agent who's been in this room. She's not here now. Let me just show you this room. 3 weeks ago, her hat was hanging right up there on that 1885 Mercedes. That's actually a lady's penny farthing with a motor on it. Mercedes motorized a lady's penny farthing. And the reason why, I'm not being sexist here, but I am talking with my mouth full, and Ginger likes that a lot. The reason why they had ladies and men penny farthings, the men penny farthings, they had the big wheel in the front and the little wheel in the back. But for the women, since back then, women in the Victorian era wore skirts, it wasn't good for them to straddle a bicycle, especially if they went over the front wheel like most of the men did when they hit an obstruction. So the ladies had the two big wheels in the back, and then they could ride the bicycle like it was a cart, and that morphed into a car by Mercedes. And Mercedes claims that that was the first automobile in the world, but one of these French frogs, see also lion fruitcakes, named Etienne something, but his first name is Entienne. He claims he had the first motorized car, so I'll let the frogs and the Germans duke it out in Windsor Castle. David, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. So let me just read this material. August the 6th, yesterday, United States Marine Phil McConnell has linked MI2, an organization of agents apparently registered in the Foreign Fugitive File, 1987 it was launched, by his sister Christine Marcy and Norman Inkster, in support of a global RCMP Interpol murder for hire service, to the unidentified Conair passenger who left beaver and pubic hairs and a small foreign faction ransom note at a crime scene associated with the Christmas Day 1996 murder of John Benet Ramsey. McConnell alleges that Marcy, Inkster, and Interpol associates have been using the Foreign Fugitive File to deploy factional teams whose crime scene agents create chaos, a state of sixes and sevens, so that the innocent, in brackets John Benet's parents, close brackets, can be accused, and the guilty, in brackets file custodians, close brackets, are sheltered. So, Phil, do you know where the Foreign Fugitive File is stored and operated from?
The honest answer is no. Can I guess?
Yes, please.
It's either 425 Carroll Street or 33 Canary Wharf.
No, it's the Department of Justice.
That's what I meant to say. I meant to say the Department of Justice.
But more specifically, that's a file or a database, if you will, using modern computing, buried somewhere in the bowels, if that's the right word, of the Department of Justice, that can be manipulated only by external parties to the United States, one being the RCMP, Interpol, and the other being Interpol. So my question to you as a loyal American is, what the hell are you doing in the Department of Justice allowing Canadians and Interpol, which was basically an arm of the Gestapo towards the end of the Second World War, to define who, from their point of view, you should treat as a foreign fugitive? Over to you.
Did you just say bowels?
I did.
Well, you know, that's the Abel Danger code word for Barack Obama's woman's egregious lesbian spoilators. Do you remember that from our writing?
Well, if you're thinking on the fly, I think that was brilliant. It's an excellent acronym.
Yeah, well, Barack Obama's woman, question mark, They don't look like women to me. Valerie Jarrett is, who, by the way, breaking news today, Valerie Jarrett's the one that gave the stand down order. I got news for you, Valerie Jarrett. Stand down or be knocked down. And Twinkle Boy that you work for is probably not in good standing with the Queen this morning after chapter 24 was rammed right over to England, causing G4S and Serco to be charged with fraud today. That's news. And David, one of our people in Japan thought that chapter 23 was rather cutting edge. I think chapter 24 was, and I think chapter 25, which might be the end of the story for the book 11, we can discuss that later. But I just want to look and see if Anita's put anything up lately. Of course, Anita she shows up as Jack Mac. Yes, Anita said this, Alexander Miggs Hayes, December 2nd of 24, so he's 15 years older than Inkster the Sphinxter. But Alexander Haig, I believe, was involved in the JFK murder, the planning of 9/11, and there's one more critical thing that he had. Oh yes, the old body count. They really needed to have body counts for the spread betters over in the city of London, as well as people that somehow went from being an average soldier who was actually below average as a West Point graduate. There were about 320 kids in his class, and his class standing was around 240, which of course exceeded another traitor from another academy, John McCain, Lumpjaw. Old Lumpjaw brags all the time about being the anchor man. The anchor man at the Naval Academy is the guy who is the lowest standing in class standing, and class standing is based on academic order of merit and two more things, one being conduct, and the other, I think, being military aptitude. And since we're not caused to be humble anymore, I will just say that whatever my class standing was in Annapolis, it was way superior to traitor Haig or to traitor and treason artist McCain. And if anybody in McCain's camp of queers is listening, I hope you really enjoy that picture of Lindsey, what's his name? What is Lindsey Graham's last name? He's from South Carolina. Lindsey Graham? I can't remember. Yeah, we think it's Lindsey Graham. And then Joe Lieberman and McCain, and these guys are crying like little sissy girls, which, by the way, they are, because the people that are conservative in reality are getting all the attention of the Americans with brains, whereas the people that are sucking on the entitlement system, they don't need to read anything or consider anything, because according to their viewpoint, as long as the TV has electrical power, so they can be misled in mega doses. Which reminds me, the first video we're putting in chapter 25 is a 3-minute video where George Carlin absolutely preaches the truth about who's controlling America and how they do it. So David, rather than talk about George Carlin, who's a comedian, or McCain, Jimmy Carter, and Haig, who are all treasonous, actually I shouldn't say treasonous in the case of Carter, he's just a wimp. I don't know if you can cause a guy to be charged with treason if he's not clever enough to figure out certain things of a military nature. For instance, when he was going to try to get a second term by rescuing the hostages in Iran, he should have known better, because he did go to Annapolis, but he allowed a bunch of staff weenies, I'll just slow down and say that again, staff weenies, to get in the cockpits of the airplanes that were going to try to pull off a very dangerous and difficult rescue of the hostages. And if Jack Mack or Skymaster or Craig Peterson can get a picture of the single C-130 that was reconfigured with forward firing rockets, that C-130 was going to land inside a stadium and take off again. However, they had these staff weenie pilots doing a lot of the flying, so not only did they crash that airplane in training, but they also crashed several helicopters in the C-130 when they did in fact try to get the hostages out, which they did not in fact do. Over to you, David.
Okay, Phil. So let's take a look at the mens rea, or the controlling mind, that was built by your sister Norman Inkster in the Department of Justice under the umbrella term Foreign Fugitive File, which begs the question as to where they are foreign from or to, and who considers them a fugitive. And that's particularly relevant when you think Interpol and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police get to manipulate that database. All right, so let's just see what Interpol are up to here with this. In order to maintain as politically neutral a role as possible, Interpol's constitution forbids, at least in theory, it to undertake any interventions or activities of a political, military, religious, or racial nature. However, if the people behind Interpol consider Christianity an alien cult, there's no reason why they shouldn't define people who promote or practice Christian ethics as fugitives. And you can see now you have ethnic cleansing in communities, including in Syria and Iran and Iraq and Afghanistan, of Christians, because, this is my theory, in the foreign fugitive files, these people have been defined as enemies of the state, specifically by your sister and Norman Inkster back in 1987. Interpol's work focuses primarily on public safety, terrorism, organized crime, crimes against humanity, environmental crime, we'll come to that in a minute, genocide, war crimes, piracy, illicit traffic in works of art, illicit drug production, drug trafficking, weapons smuggling, human trafficking, money laundering, child pornography, we'll come back to that, white-collar crime, computer crime, intellectual property crime, and corruption. So my question to you, Field, is how good a job are they doing? Over to you.
Well, I wasn't listening to you because I had to deliver 2 pies to a waiting vehicle, and everybody at Livestream saw the wheelman driving the getaway pie vehicle. But David, I think if this is an organization that claims to do a whole shopping list of things, I'd compare it to the DEA, which is the Drug Enforcement Agency. And by the way, in the chapter, which I'm sure you haven't read, there was a mention of DHS, Department of Homeland Security, which is another tentacle. Yesterday, they were empowered to start searching people on the street randomly. DHS, Department of Homeland Security, and of course we got to think back to the 1930s when a certain British agent thought to be a Nazi named Hitler, and Hitler was an Austrian gay prostitute turned British agent turned fake leader of Germany. He was the one that first used the term Homeland Security, so I think we can assume that the Nazis are still big power players in the American government. They just might call themselves something else. They might call themselves something like Ubaid, which is a hairy camel trader, or worse yet, his wife, or they might call themselves Valerie Jarrett. There was a Bush in the hospital yesterday. I imagine it's pretty stressful when the truth comes out and keeps coming out, and there's not a darn thing they can do to make it go away. Also, I see Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac now are in trouble, and I wonder who it was that first started ringing that bell, David, about 2 years ago, because they had a chocolate one and a vanilla one. Franklin Raines, I think, was on the chocolate team, and the vanilla team was headed by Jamie Gorelick. And you know, it doesn't matter what flavor you make vomit, whether it's vanilla flavored or chocolate flavored vomit. These dogs keep returning to their vomit. And back to the DEA, which would be a lot like Interpol, if they advertise that they can do 10 things, what they're really telling you is they can't. Or if they say they can do 10 things, they're really saying they do, and they prevent other people from getting their piece of the pie, or in this case, the chocolate and vanilla vomit. So my reason for stating that is because I once had a career DEA agent as my best personal friend, And in the 13 years where the Fargo Guard had F-4s, whenever he and I got to fly together, the whole world was in trouble because we had similar personalities, similar processors. We both were protected by God, and anything that was floating around North Dakota or Canadian airspace was quickly to be victimized and humiliated. We did that because we were immature, by the way. I would never humiliate anyone nowadays, since when 1940, excuse me, and when I turned 44, shortly after I turned 44, because it was February of '94, I got my door knocked on by God, so I don't humiliate people anymore, with the exception of those who are the enemies of God. And if somebody wants to find out if they're enemies of God, you can find your types of pastimes listed in Hebrews 10:27. A better example, I think, is in Jeremiah 5:26 to 31. And I don't know if Maranatha's in the chat room, but if Maranatha's in the chat room, perhaps she'd put up Jeremiah 5:26 to 31. And if she's not, I'll turn it over to you, David, and go looking for it myself. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. So this is very interesting about Interpol. In the first part of the 20th century, several efforts were taken to formalize international police cooperation, but they initially failed. Among these efforts were the first International Criminal Police Congress in Monaco in 1914 and the International Police Conference in New York in 1922. The Monaco Congress failed because it was organized by legal experts and political officials, not by police professionals, while the New York Conference failed to attract international attention. In 1923, another initiative was taken at the International Criminal Police Congress in Vienna, and that's where Hitler was, I believe, a bathhouse puff boy. I don't know exactly the right term for that, where the International Criminal Police Commission, ICPC, was founded as the direct forerunner of Interpol. This is very interesting. Founding members were Poland, Austria, Belgium, China, Egypt, France, Germany, Greece, Hungary, Italy, the Netherlands, Romania, where your sister used to go and visit the orphanages with Leonora Guerrier, a lesbian mate, Sweden, Switzerland, and Yugoslavia. The United States did not join Interpol until 1938, although a US police officer unofficially attended the 1923 Congress. The United Kingdom joined in 1928. Now, here's a prediction field. I believe UK intelligence, MI5 and MI6, had perfected the use of pedophile entrapment and extortion in the closing years of the 19th century as a result of experience in Grosvenor Street and Toynbee Hall. And by the time the 20th century came around, they were confident that they could infiltrate these pedophile entrapment and extortion experts in any of the countries that would form the major players of World War II and manipulate their perception of the threat from Hitler and create sixes and sevens or chaos in the European mainland that, as a result, would allow them to take over the post-World War II administration of many sovereign states, including the United States of America. So in America, in 1987, so that's quite a jump from 39-45 World War II, the predecessors to your sister, who was the senior counsel for the detention and deportation program of the Immigration and Naturalization Service, had operated Project Paperclip, or Operation Paperclip, where mass murderers, torturers, child killers, all of the kinds of people that execute the kind of crimes that Interpol is supposed to investigate and protect, were infiltrated into the United States, into the main organs of your government, particularly the Department of Justice. CIA, I believe, was started by the British in 1947. FBI existed, of course, under Edgar Hoover, who came up with that fascinating term, the citizen is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous it cannot believe they existed. Come 1987, your sister, and I don't like always asking you to repeat yourself, Phil, but I think this is so important. Your sister around then put in a call that you thought translated into how to protect a plane carrying prisoners from a mutiny. Can you just go through that again? And I'll tell you what I think she was trying to do then. Over to you.
Okay, but before I do that, and I'm going to ask Pastor Clydesdale to remind me that I'm supposed to talk about my sister is asking me to do something. First, I want to read your quote. I think. Maybe I can't find it. Hang on, David. Okay, well, never mind. I thought I had a quote from, in fact, specifically, I thought I had the quote you just rattled off, but I didn't. So I'll answer your question as soon as I finish reading this. This is a brief narrative from Jeremiah 5:26-31, which talks about some of the enemies of God. And it goes like this. For among my people are found wicked men. They lie in wait as one who sets snares. They set a trap. They catch men. As a cage is full of birds, so their houses are full of deceit. Therefore they have become great and grown rich. They have grown fat. They are sleek. Yet they surpass the deeds of the wicked. They do not plead the cause of the fatherless. Yet they prosper, and the right of the needy they do not defend. Shall I not punish them for these things, says the Lord? Shall I not avenge myself on such a nation as this? An astonishing and horrible thing has been committed in the land. The prophets prophesy falsely. The priests rule by their own power, and my people love to have it so. But what will you do in the end? That was Jeremiah 5:26-31.
What they do in the end is elect Obama.
They do what?
What they do in the end is elect Obama.
They left Obama?
Elect.
Oh, elect Obama. Well, I think Obama will not make it to the end of this term. David, I'm going to get to your question, but I want to point out to somebody, and most of you probably haven't seen this, but there's a nationwide effort now among a group that I think would be characterized as young liberals who have figured out they're taking it in the ear. And they've got a mass 48 statewide effort to hang impeach Obama signs over every highway overpass they can find. And each state has an organization. I don't know how to find it. I mean, not while we're on the show. I can find it later because I have it on my computer at home. But I just joined. And of course, I don't anticipate going to an overpass and hanging impeach Obama signs, but I think it's a good sign that this lost generation, and I'm talking about the people born between 1980 and 1995, so those people would be 33 to, I'm doing the math, 18. Yeah, so they're all allowed to vote. Well, guess what? That lost generation now, which has the vote, outnumbers the group I'm in, and I think, what did they call me? Baby boomers. Yeah, apparently some of my baby boomer friends are kicking the bucket. So now in Act 2, the hammer goes from the baby boomers who were misled by the Republicans and Democrats in equal measure, down to the generation lost, which apparently they're a little bit more, well, they're younger, they have more energy. A lot of them are unemployed, therefore they have time to goof off and do social media. And they're coming around to the collective way of thinking that Obama is not doing them any favors. And so the young people want to get rid of this piece of human excrement. And that's where I'm going to stick my nose into the young people's business and make sure chapter 23, chapter 24, chapter 25, and every other chapter we write going forward goes to the state headquarters of all these young people that are sick of politics as usual, which of course is politics paralysis, because even though most people over 40 or 45 think that Republicans and Democrats are different, they apparently haven't studied the Bankers' Manifesto of 1892 when a bunch of European elitist bankers met in Omaha. Notice I didn't say fat boy Oracle of Omaha, Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett, I did not allude to the fact that Warren Buffett had 300 Goldman Sachs bankers in the basement of the former SAC Strategic Air Command headquarters at Offutt Air Force Base in Bellevue, Nebraska, because I would never mention something like that, because if word got out that I'm telling everybody that Warren Buffett was a draft dodger in World War II and that he was working for the FBI, and then after he successfully evaded service, serving his country in World War II, then Fat Boy got the keys to the Strategic Air Command headquarters and had 300 Goldman Sachs bankers who should be at work in the Twin Towers sitting there under the ground in Offutt Air Force Base on the morning of 9/11, and I would consider that evil voyeurism. For instance, you often talk, David, about a guy named Robert Hansen, who was once thought to be the greatest spy that the United States ever captured and imprisoned, and he had a bad habit of wanting his neighbor to see some intimate activity between Robert Hansen and his wife, so he had a peephole in the wall between their apartments. Now, if Robert Hansen is a pervert for doing that, what does that make Warren Buffett and Goldman Sachs for watching the foreknowledge? They had foreknowledge, and they had predestined the carnage in New York City on 9/11. And it's not just the 301 Goldman Sachs jerks in Omaha. They also had 3 of the 4 E-4Bs airborne. One of the E-4Bs was captured on film and called the mystery plane over Washington, D.C., because nobody recognized what it was, which I find hard to believe, because one glimpse of the airplane and I knew what it was. If anybody like CCW or Jack Mark is here, could you put up an image of an E-4B? And if you can find the image of the mystery E-4B, you can see that as it's flying away from the camera in a right bank turn, perhaps nose high, the hump, the mysterious telltale hump on the elevated section of the 747 derivative clearly identifies it as an E-4B. There's only 4 E-4Bs in the world. On the morning of 9/11, 3 out of 4 were airborne, and 1 was where it should be, on the ground at Andrews Air Force Base on alert. G.H.W. Bush, who once said that if the American people ever find out what we've done to them, they'll chase us down the street with ropes and hang us from the lamppost. I think maybe it's time to get the ropes ready, because G.H.W. Bush is the individual who turned SAC into history. In other words, G.H.W. Bush killed SAC, made the SAC headquarters redundant, and not his predecessor, the guy that came along lately, the Oxford Lipbiter, the rapist who was over there in Moscow trying to help John Kerry figure out how Moscow could beat up on the United States of America. Some people know him as William Jefferson Clinton, but of course that's not his name, is it? But this sufferer of Peyronie's syndrome, after G.H.W. Bush of one fake party shut down SAC, Peyronie's breath, he came along and he turned the E-4Bs over to FEMA. And for people that still think FEMA is the Federal Emergency Management Administration, that might be their name, but they don't manage anything. They deploy them. Just like DHS, they don't respond to Homeland Security issues, they create them. Let me just rattle off 5 they wanted to create. They wanted to create the July 20th, Aurora, Colorado, Dark Night Rising, Lone Gunmen, plural, lone gunmen. There were 3 lone gunmen in Aurora, Colorado. In August of the same year, 2012, I think it was August, maybe it was November, somebody will look it up, but I'm pretty sure it was August, at Cudahy, Wisconsin, there were 3 lone gunmen that shot up a Sikh temple. Now this is interesting, because when the lone gunmen, plural, were shooting up the Sikh temple in Cudahy, Wisconsin, the former boyfriend of the female director of the the Wisconsin office, which is in Milwaukee, of the FBI, I can't remember her name right now, and Teresa Carlson's probably really happy I can't remember her name, but she's romantically linked to the FBI director up in New York City, and lo and behold, on the same day in Teresa Carlson's Milwaukee, the same day there's a Sikh temple being attacked there by 3 false flag lone gunmen, plural. Her former boyfriend, I mean, I think it's former, you never know. B.B. King once wrote a song called "The Thrill Is Gone," and maybe the thrill was gone, and that's why she left New York. But I find it interesting that the girl FBI person is at a Sikh venue in Milwaukee on the same day her former boyfriend in New York City is in a Sikh temple. And my only question is, was the Sikh temple in New York that the FBI guy was at the same day that Milwaukee was being hit with a false flag, was that Brooklyn or Queens? Frankly, I don't know. Did I fire 5 shots or 6? You know, this is a 44, and that's the most powerful handgun. But do you feel lucky today, punk? So, David, you asked me a question about 3 light years ago, and the question was about a phone call from my sister where she asked for some help technology-wise in getting prisoners safely from the Hawaiian Islands to the west coast of the United States of America. And I told her, that's really easy. Get some used airliners and drone them. And she says, well, I don't know where to get used airliners. And I said, call this guy at Northwest Airlines. And I literally took a book. It's called an FOM, Field Operations Manual? Close, Flight Operations Manual. I say that with a smile because do you know what they call the local offices, Clyde, of the FBI? Yep, Clyde knew it. If Clyde knows it, how come you don't, people? Yeah, the FBI has field offices all over. In fact, we're sitting in the Plum City, Wisconsin FBI office right now. Now, FBI doesn't stand for Federal Bureau of Investigation. It stands for Fields Boeing Investigation, because after I told my sister how to drone Boeings, well, she and Hillary Diane, excuse me, I almost said Hillary Diane Rodham Clinton. I don't want to do that. She might send me to Benghazi and tell me to bend over, just like Christopher Stevens. Oh, by the way, Hillary Clinton probably is very appreciative that now we're going after Valerie Jarrett. But don't celebrate too much their thunder thighs. So, David, I told my sister to drone airliners. I opened my FOM, Flight Operations Manual, probably a section 9, and I found the phone contact for a guy who was in excess aircraft disposal or some such entity. And so I rattled off his phone number, his fax number. I gave my sister, Chris Marcy. Notice she's trying to fool us by changing from Christine Marcy into Chris. I think maybe we'll just call her Teen, T-I-N-E, so she can have a code name. That way we don't have to say Christine Marcy or Queen Hornet or Chris Marcy, and we don't have to make reference to Napa Wash, NSAWW. By the way, another change that we've caused, David, is at NSAWW, they've all changed their email addresses. How do I know that? Because I sent an email this morning to D. Brown, which is Deb Brown. She's changed her email address. And then the person who used to be Courtney Banks, well, she's changed her email address too, and she's also changed her name to Courtney Banks Spaeth, S-P-A-E-T-H. I wonder if Courtney Banks Spaeth knows that I know who Nick Spaeth is. And if anybody from, let me just get close so you can see who I am. If anybody from NSAWW at 1950 Old Gallows Road in Vienna, Virginia, knows anybody named Spaeth, you might be interested in who Nick Spaeth was. And I know you guys don't have big research assets like we do here at Able Danger, so I'll just help you. Nick Spaeth was from the same Twin Cities as, let's see, I had a really good name. Oh, yes, Fleck. I'm going to come up for air here, David, in a minute, but before I come up for air, that woman that took down Petraeus, Paula Broadwell, if anyone does a Google search for Paula Broadwell plus Fleck plus Petraeus plus Chips plus Pastel, you can scratch your head trying to figure out who Fleck is, and it's not Fletch, it's Fleck, F-L-E-C-K. But there's a Fleck and there's a Spaeth in the same Twin Cities, and there's a river that runs through it, and the river that runs through it is the Missouri River. I'll just leave it at that. So, David, I told my sister, if you want to get your prisoners from Hawaii to the mainland, call the guy at Northwest, tell him you want a DC-9-30 with -15 engines. Tell him you'll settle for a Boeing 727-100, and then you just pay about $300,000 to get them droned, and then I can come fly either one of them for you until your flunky pilots get through training. And my sister stopped me and she says, "What does drone mean?" So I explained that's where you take the pilot out of the equation and replace it with a $300,000 piece of equipment you just have to pay once. For instance, let's take Lufthansa 747-400s. When they were delivered brand new in 1995, they all had Boeing uninterruptible autopilots that would allow the airplane to be flown by technology from engine start to engine shutdown with no humans. And the advantage to the people like the people that hang around the city of London and the man's country gay. Speaking of gays in Chicago, David, I don't know if you know this, but Chicago pensioners now have figured out their pensions are no good, which should probably not make Obama very popular, since he and his boyfriend, Ram the Rammer, frequently go for pastel pleasure at man's country. You know, I was in the Navy, and a lot of men in the Navy ships had to take a shower, and we had something called water hours. You could be in the shower for a grand total of maybe 20 or 30 seconds. And, you know, it's really hard to get the soap on and the soap off in 30 seconds. But somehow Obama and Ram the Rammer, they spend endless hours in the shower, and you never know what they're doing in there. Perhaps they're playing drop the soap. Perhaps they're trying to figure out how to cheat the pensioners in Chicago out of their well-earned pensions. If you consider sitting in a cop car eating donuts and dozing, well-earned. But at some point, the New York City Fire Department, the New York City Police Department, and now the Chicago and Detroit police departments and fire departments are going to figure out, and by the way, it's not just Detroit, Chicago, and New York. There's now 20 cities, 20 big cities in the U.S. who are coming to grips with the fact that all these employees who are expecting a retirement or who are on a retirement are probably going to be getting a little irritated at the Obama administration. So I think I answered your question. Your question was, what did my sister ask me about in December of 1988? And the question was how to get the airplane safely from point A to point B without losing them to human hijackers. And I said, you drone them. I explained droning. I explained where to get the airplane. Then she and Hillary Diane Roadhog Thunder Thighs, notice I didn't say Clinton, they went ahead and got the BEI Corporation QRS-11 gyro chip. They got the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot, and they have created the situation we find right now in 2013 that any airliner with a glass cockpit is essentially a drone. And if the American people find military and surveillance drones repugnant, how are you going to feel the next time your grandma dies and you have to take a ride to New York City or Sarasota, Florida to go to Granny's funeral? How would you feel if you looked up in the cockpit and you didn't see any people because the aircraft were droned? David, did I answer your question?
Yeah, you did, Phil. And I would argue that your sister was lying to you when she said that she wanted a solution to the problem of transporting prisoners. What she was really doing, and remember in that 1987, 1988 period, you have Bernardine at the Sidley Austin law firm in Chicago, grooming and training female interns in the art of pedophile entrapment and extortion. Remember, Bernardine Dawn is an expert torturer, and I don't know when she learned how to torture, but apparently torture is actually not just a matter of pulling out someone's fingernails. It's a combination of physical brutality to the individual combined with a lot of psychological stuff. And I think we now can understand that if an individual, when they were young, for whatever reason, and there might be a number of relatively innocent reasons, that is, an individual's got drunk and gone to the red light district of Vancouver and gone into a room with a prostitute, and they're into S&M, sadomasochistic sex, and then a child has entered into the mix. Whatever reason explains the encounter with the child, whoever has custody of the images of that encounter owns that individual, and if that individual gets to a high position in a target organization, probably owns the target organization for the rest of their lives. So I think what your sister was doing back in 1987 or 1988, when she put that call to you, she was finding out what technology would be required by her private airline, yet to be launched, that would become to be known as Con Air, or the United States Justice Prisoner and Alien Transportation System. And what that would do in combination with the foreign fugitive files in the Department of Justice would allow her to select individuals who would appear in the foreign fugitive files and fool American counterintelligence. And I think we've decided that Abel Danger, spelled A-B-L-E, Danger, was launched in 1968. Maybe you could just comment on that, Field. Over to you.
Yeah, I can, as soon as I copy down this phone number, which is 926-528 blank. I'm busy all day long, David. In fact, I can prove it. Look at this. There's my phone. I was just copying down something I had to do from yesterday. Here's a newspaper from England, and you want me to comment on 1968. Well, in 1968, notice I didn't say Mitt Romney, I said Mantle Pants. Mantle Pants in the summer of '68 was over on Mormon. He's one of those cult religions called Mormonism, and they like to go out and mislead youth everywhere. So they send these young Mormons out to places like Paris, France, and he was over there, and of course, a guy that's, I don't know what he would have been, maybe 20 or 22, you probably get very lonely when you're in a strange place, so they set him up with a date. He had a domestic named, look at this, Birds of a Feather, Cressida Dick, front page. I just got my English newspaper today, David, so as soon as I get done answering your question, I'm going to go take a look at these horribly ugly women. But the headline gets me: victims betrayed, officials honored, a conspiracy of silence or a common purpose. Well, Americans, Canadians don't feel like this isn't coming to your neighborhood. In the United States, we have a program starting this fall called Common Core. Common Core and Common Purpose are both rotten to the core, and if Cressida Dick and Dick Bent don't want to have some urological problems, I'd suggest they either quit doing what they're doing or turn state's evidence and help us bring the guilty parties, who are roughly 300 families in the whole world are trying to destroy all the rest of us. George Carlin has a great video, which I'll put in the chapter. David, you just asked me a serious question about 1968, so the serious answer is you and Mitt Romney were over in Paris. You had recently come from Schlumberger in Australia. In 1968, if you want the summer of '68, I would have been on the USS Waldron DD 699 right up until we had a collision at sea, in which case I was on the USS Beatty DD 756. In the meantime, we took our crippled Waldron into the Bethlehem Steel Dry Docks in Baltimore, Maryland, and that's, of course, everyone knows Baltimore, Maryland's famous because in 1955, Miss Lubrack, and I'm not making this up, Nancy Pelosi starred in a oil advertisement where about a 53 Oldsmobile was up on a rack and 3 or 4 technicians in white jackets that were about ready to change the oil on this GM product that was on a rack. There was a woman with a one-piece bathing suit. Thank goodness it was one piece. And that was a young Nancy Pelosi, and this was before she married the mafia boss from Baltimore, and they retired out to California, where the mafia boss and this wench have caused the taxpayers of the United States of America millions and millions of discretionary dollars, and hauling her in the Boeing 757. If you want to look it up, the military calls that a C-32, Charlie 32, but it's a Boeing 757. And the reason she and Ashcroft avoid the airlines, both Nancy Pelosi through her corporation named Air Patrol, and if you want to check Air Patrol, they were involved in the Fort Hood false flag, where the phony baloney shrink is alleged to have shot up 20 or 30 people. That's absolutely false. They knew that, and he happens to be a Muslim, that doesn't matter. The people trying to destroy the United States of America and England, they will use Muslims, they will use Christians, they will use agnostics, and they'll use 100 goats on the Washington, D.C. cemetery lawn They'll use whatever it takes to distract you and confuse you while they rob you and cause you to be sick so that you'll be penniless and breathless just about the same time, and they'll avoid paying your pensions, which takes us back to New York City, Detroit, Chicago, and 18 more large cities. So in the summer of 67, I was on a Navy boats, and that's only because in February of 67, I had taken an oath, and it was February 14th. And if anybody wants to figure out where I was on February 14th of 1967, go ahead and try to figure it out and put it in the chat room, and I'll tell you if you're right. But anyway, you asked me several times, David, when I took my oaths of office, and the Navy oath of office was the 28th of June of 67 at Annapolis. The Marine Corps was the 9th of June, 71 at Annapolis. The Air Force was the 5th of July of 77 at Fargo, North Dakota Air National Guard Base. That was sort of a stealth oath, but I don't want to digress. But if any of the dangerettes could just send me an email saying stealth oath, I'll explain that, or I'll flesh it out during a debriefing in chapter 25. But back to your question. In the summer of 68, I was drifting along with the tumbling tumbleweeds on the USS Beatty and the USS Waldron. And this is after I'd taken my first oath and my second oath. And my first oath, which will be explained in an open court under oath with cameras running, as soon as the United States of America or the citizens therein get serious about holding our elected perverts accountable. And David, there is some hope they'll be held accountable because there's some laws changing in Texas right now that are going to rearrange the way grand juries are assembled and seated. And the judge and the prosecutors aren't going to get good seating. We the people are going to get the best seats. And we the people, like speaking in Texas, I don't know if Agent Telstar's here, but Agent Telstar is a guy who lives within 50 miles of Liberty Hill, Texas, and I've met him several times. We've had dinner at the Garage Mahal. And if you thought I said Taj Mahal, you're mistaken. If anybody looks in the phone book in Austin, Texas, you'll find an Indian restaurant that does not serve alcohol, and the name of it is the Garage Mahal. They have wonderful food, and they also don't have any doors. It's an outdoor restaurant. So even though they don't have any stupid juice, you can bring your own and get just as stupid as you want. But of course, when I was there with Agent Telstar, we weren't getting stupid. We were exchanging valuable information about what's on the rooftops of the tallest and most iconic buildings in Austin, Texas, which, as many people that follow our work know, Austin, Texas is the southern drop-off point for exploited children leaving the country. David, I answered the question. I was doing intelligence work afloat, and you were over in Paris, probably hanging around the Pink Pussycat, and Mantle Pants and his domestic's name off the top of my head was Pardo, P-A-R-D-O, and they called him a domestic or a cook, but actually all he was a well-paid ankle grabber. David, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Field. So in 1968, I was in Paris just after the Paris riots. I spoke pretty good French by then. I had a lot of French friends, some in quite high places. And the general perception of the Paris riots is they were orchestrated from the outside. I think now, looking back, they were orchestrated out of the United Kingdom. Same kind of approach as St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, which was spearheaded by Sir Francis Walsingham, the spymaster to Queen Elizabeth. So back to this 1987 development. Let me just put that back in the chat room because it keeps moving away from me.
Hang on, fire hose. David, I'm reading the paper. Don't be talking while I'm reading the paper. Did you say the summer of 68 had some orchestrated proxy riots, yes or no?
Yes.
Guess what was going on in Chicago in the summer of 68? Take a wild guess.
Days of Rage.
Yeah, there are orchestrated proxy riots. And what we had here was we had England, which then still had a modicum of power, which they've now lost in favor of France. So England was trying to get the U.S. to melt down from within, and they were trying to get France to melt down from within, thinking that they would be the heir apparent to all the wonderful things in the world. They don't know jack diddly about God, and I suggest it's time they start investigating, because you don't know how many more breaths you have left. So David, while I read the UK column, go ahead and put that thing up and read it to everybody. Are you still there, David?
Yeah, sorry. Some people think that BIC in New York stood for Business International Corporation. It actually stands for British Invisible Companies, which is the essentially the livery companies. And they hired the so-called weathermen to stage the riot in Chicago to start rearranging the perception of progress being made by the United States in Vietnam to roll back the communists. And in fact, I think 1968 was the victory known as the Battle of Tet, or the Tet Offensive, where the Americans with their allies managed to destroy significant numbers of North Vietnamese, Chinese regular army and Viet Cong. And to all intents and purposes, there was a victory of the independent, more liberal-minded humanitarian parts of Vietnam over communism, but it was an entirely orchestrated victory, and so they decided they wanted some riots in Paris and in Chicago, and British intelligence looks like they hired these people. And again, it comes back to this common element. If you're hiring someone for a political agenda to commit acts of sabotage, assassination, and deception, you don't want those individuals, if they're ever arrested or intercepted, to reveal the deeper message. So what the British have done over centuries is build these very sophisticated pedophile traps for people like Bernardine-Dawn, who walks into that trap willingly or unwillingly and engages in sex with a child of a particularly brutal nature. The photographs are taken back by British intelligence and stored in London. And basically, Bernardine-Dawn becomes an agent, as do her proteges at Sidley Austin, which include Michelle LaVaughn Robinson and Barack Obama. So let's just understand now the mens rea, or the controlling mind, of the forces arrayed against the United States of America as a sovereign state. Specifically, let me just go back and put that up again. Interpol records contain information entered for foreign countries by the United States National Bureau, Central Bureau, USNCB of Interpol, which is housed in the US Department of Justice. You know, Field, when the analysis of the work we've done collectively is complete, I think that sentence may prove to be absolutely pivotal. Let me repeat it. Interpol records contain information entered for foreign countries by the United States National Central Bureau, USNCB of Interpol, which is housed in the US Department of Justice. In 1987, that file would have contained the names of people deemed by Interpol and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to be foreign fugitives. That is, not deemed by representatives elected or unelected of the United States government. So deep in the bowels of the Department of Justice, under the direct control of your sister, Christine Marcy, who at various times was Assistant Deputy Attorney General, I believe working for Jamie Gorelick, your sister had access and authority to go into that file with her accessories before the crime in the RCMP and Interpol and play with the names that would be presented to the American public at a later date as the principles behind Al-Qaeda. What I'm saying there is Al-Qaeda was never more than a partition in the United States National Central Bureau in the Department of Justice, a partition in the Foreign Fugitive File database set up by your sister. So if she wanted to create the impression that Al-Qaeda existed externally, all she needed to do was recruit long bearded camel botherers out of Afghanistan or Pakistan and present them under the name Al-Qaeda to the American public on their television screens. So American public perceives an external threat called Al-Qaeda, when in fact what they should be doing, and that's our challenge field, is recognizing the mens rea, the controlling mind of Al-Qaeda, sits in the United States Department of Justice. And there's a particular function that's relevant to all of our arguments there that is carried out by, maybe someone could dig up the proper title for this woman, but her name is Francie Haig. And if someone could find in the chat room what that function is, she's a senior executive service person placed by your sister in the Department of Justice, working for the Deputy Attorney General on monitoring the movement of child pornography over the internet.
What's her name again, David?
Francie Haig.
Oh, okay. I can get it for you.
Okay, so Francie Haig, together with your sister, Jamie Gorlick, Janet Reno, effectively those women, and I think that's a pedophile feminist community, they control access with Canadians and Interpol leaders to a database which stores the names of people bonded into this international foreign fugitive network. And those people will do anything, including commit suicide, rather than have published images of what they've done to a child. And I don't care whether that's a Hindu society, a Christian society, a Lutheran society, the United States Air Force, the United States Marine. We're all young at some stage. Some are more sexually active than others, but nonetheless, it's a very compelling drive for almost every human being. And if it's monitored skillfully, and the individuals are piloted towards traps such as Hull House in Chicago, Toynbee Hall in the United Kingdom, the Greek life societies in the major universities in the United States and Canada, the pig farm, the S&M studios at 425 Carroll Street run by Starnet, which is a front for the RCMP and Interpol. That's where people went to be trapped. They went unknowingly. They went into the studios. There were actors employed to dress up, maybe in bondage gear. A child would be inserted, and that individual who might be visiting Vancouver could go back to Thailand or to the United Nations in Geneva, and the rest of their lives they're owned. And that's the essence of the virtual floating matrix field. What it means is those individuals in that foreign fugitive file, which is partitioned so that the kinds of individuals your sister would have needed to put on the attack on the World Trade Center of 1993, to attempt to kill George Bush Sr. in Kuwait in 1993, to kill 24 young black British men at the Branch Davidian compound in Waco in 93, to place a bomb under the daycare center in the Borough building in Oklahoma City, to blow up the East African embassies of the United States of America in 1988, to send the USS Cole into Aden Harbor to get blown up or nearly blown up when it was docked unlawfully, when it should have been refueling at sea, to put the 9/11 attacks together, where these foreign fugitive people are deployed as red team or blue team members in a continuity of government exercise where the script has been written by General Alexander Haig, because he would have been one of the few people to know which are the principal control centers that would have to be destroyed on 9/11 to stand a realistic chance of replacing the government of the United States with individuals in a foreign fugitive database. So fast forward to the present, she's still skulking out there. And what's fascinating, Field, is if you look at Clinton Rubin and McConnell International and NSAWW, you can see they're desperately trying to scrub the mere mention of your sister's name. You Google Christine Marcy, and basically it all comes back to Abel Danger now because they're scrubbing her past.
Did you say
they're actually,
David, did you say they're scrubbing her pants?
Scrubbing her past. Sorry about the accent, Phil.
Oh, okay, sorry. I thought they were trying to scrub her pants. I thought that would take some heavy-duty scrubbing. Back to you, David.
So the extraordinary thing about having a foreign fugitive file embedded in the Department of Justice, where the custodian is responsible for monitoring the movement of child pornography internationally on the internet, it gives British intelligence, well, let's be more specific, it gives the Octopus, MI2, which stands for Marcy Inkster Interpol. Marcy Inkster Interpol is the controlling mind in the Department of Justice. The two people are alive. Obviously, Christine Marcy is still alive. She hasn't topped herself yet. If I were her, I probably would, because she's a disgrace to humanity. This guy, Norman Inkster, is still wandering around, pontificating. But just think about Norman Inkster. So in 1987, he's had a career with the RCMP. The RCMP in 1979, with the Vancouver Police Department and McDonald Detweiler, built a man-in-the-middle capability to hack 911 calls. So by 1979, it was possible in BC, and that's probably where the expertise gathered most rapidly and effectively, to take a woman from the downtown east side, take her out to the pig farm, bring in your friends, rape and torture the woman in front of a camera with a visitor. Maybe a visitor to BC from the United Nations or the Association of, no, the, what is it, OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. Any leader who might be visited, Prince Philip, flown by, well, it wasn't in 1979, Russell Williams, take him to the pig farm, ostensibly for a party of drugs or whatever, and ultimately torture a woman, possibly the woman's children, to death in front of the camera, and you own that individual for the rest of your life. All you need to do is find a place to record the information.
Hey, David.
Go ahead.
Aren't we replowing old ground? Haven't we already proven this to everybody's satisfaction?
What I'm trying to do is identify the location of the controlling mind. But if you want to take it in a different direction, go ahead, Phil.
No, I just want to, obviously your egg timer failed about 3 weeks ago, but you asked me about Francie Hakes. And, you know, you work way too hard because we don't need to do this heavy lifting. God's already done it for us. Because in the chapter that went up last night, or the previous chapter, where was the airplane departing from and where was it going to? Do you recall, David?
No, Phil.
Okay, the airplane took off from Red Wing, Minnesota in chapter 23. There was some type of a mechanical problem at the end of chapter 23. Chapter 24, which went up less than 18 hours ago, had the aircraft landing in Atlanta, Georgia, and it parked right at the remote fire station where the 24-year-old black woman was found hanged last month. Now, that's what God has done. He's given us the reality of everything I just said. It's 100% accurate. Okay? Now, you asked me about Francie Hakes, and let's see how good your mind is working today, David. In chapter 24, the airplane landed at which airport?
I don't remember, Phil.
I just said it, Atlanta, Georgia.
Oh, right.
Yeah, remember that I will not leave you or forsake you, nor will I ask you a question you shouldn't be able to answer if you're listening, as opposed to thinking. Okay, so you asked me about Francie Hakes. I just gave you a song and dance about our airplane leaving Red Wing and going to Atlanta, Georgia. Let me read you from the Department of Justice crap, and that's not a slam against crap, it's a slam against the Department of Justice. If any crap out there is offended, I'm sorry. The Department of Crap has appointed Francie Haig to serve as National Coordinator for Child Exploitation, Prevention, and Interdiction. Let me translate that. She's in charge of allowing certain people to do it and not allowing the general masses to do it. That's all that means. Right here in this paper, which everybody can see, this is an example, and it all comes out of the City of London. Let me read you the first paragraph here and compare it to that. Livid, absolutely livid. Dickens gets the CBE and we are losing our jobs is how some of Oxford and Sherwell Valley's college staff described the recent award of the CBE, which means she's a knight or something. I don't know what a girl knight would be, maybe a recipient. But anyway, she got the CBA to Principal Sally Dickens. Once again, you can't make these names up. In Vancouver PD, we got RCMP Dick Bent. In Metropolitan Place in England, London area, we have Cressida Dick. And down at the Oxford and Sherwell Valley College staff, you got this pervert named Sally Dickens. They had a history. In fact, I'll just read this. You can follow along with me. New students come forward with allegations of sexual and physical abuse, pornography, grooming, and bullying. OCVC, that's Oxford and Sherwell Valley College, OCVC head Sally Dickens awarded CBE. That's the same as my sister. Or let's take my sister out of the equation since NSAWW. By the way, if anybody from NSAWW has accepted my invitation to come participate today, feel free to call me right here, 715-307-8222. We're not hiding as much as you gal ghouls. And when I say gal ghouls or ghoul gals of Old Gallows Road, that includes J.M. Cohen, who went to Annapolis. And even though he's not in the Department of Justice, he falls under the crap comment. David, back to how we can't make this stuff up because God already has laid it out for us. That first paragraph that I read to you about Francie Haig. The Department of Justice has appointed Francie Haig to serve as the National Coordinator of Exposing U.S. Children to Sodomy. In effect, they use cleaner words, but that's what they meant. Okay, so we have this airplane take off from Red Wing and go to Atlanta. Now we have Francie Haig being the brokerage that handles exploited children while they're trying to claim to all we the people that they're protecting. Okay, well, unbeknownst to you, David, and also unbeknownst to me, because I'm just a troubled guy reading the New York, this paper out of England. It's called the UK column. It's as good in the UK as the Eau Claire Journal, now called the US Journal, is in the US. So we have our airplane taking off from Red Wing, going to Atlanta Hartsfield Airport. Francie Haig takes off from her launching point at Department of Justice. David, I'm going to put the camera on the screen so people can follow along with me, and you'll see how God's doing this for us. This is the top where she leaves D.C. after exposing the children to great risk. Here's the bottom. Haig is currently Assistant U.S. Attorney in the Northern District of Georgia. She joined the U.S. Attorney's Office in 2002 after having served as Assistant District Attorney in Georgia for 6 years. Haig has focused on child exploitation offenses and has worked with international, federal, state, and local law enforcement, as well as victims groups to prosecute and protect children. That's really some flowery language. It doesn't mean the words, if you believe them, means she's on the good side. Of course she's not. What these people like Francie Haig do, it's just like the DEA. The DEA doesn't keep drugs out of America. The DEA selects which countries we're going to enrich buying their drugs. In the you can't make this stuff up news from yesterday, a U.S. Air Force C-17 Globemaster III just took 48 tons, or was it 24 tons? I think it was 24 tons of cocaine from Costa Rica to Miami. For those of you like me and Clyde who have never seen a drug, at least I haven't, some people would say, oh, wait a minute, alcohol's a drug. Oh, Suddenly my memory got better. But I've never seen a narcotic drug. But I think back in the 80s, there was a TV show called Miami Vice, and I have no idea what it's about. But at that time, Miami was the #1 cocaine sniffing city in the United States of America. And who's to say anything has changed? Just like Bernadine Dorn, at some point when she and her pervert Beard, I don't think they're husband and wife. I mean, they might be legally, but I don't think they exchange heavenly bodily fluids because she's uglier than the south end of a northbound ox with diarrhea on a high roughage diet. And her husband's even less attractive. His name's something. He's the guy that stomps on flags in Barack Obama, whose name is not Barack Obama. His name's Ubaid. But of course, Ubaid changed it to Barack Obama in 1982 in Canada. So, David, I can't remember why I jumped. Oh, yes, I wanted to tell you what God's doing about this. Totally unbeknownst to where Francie Haig is today, or what her background is, you just asked me a question. In answering your question, I found out that Francie Haig is in northern Georgia. Well, blow me down. That's where Atlanta is, too, and that's where our team of Able Danger, Able Bodies, and NSA. By the way, a lot of people out there in the espionage world think NSA stands for, what does it stand for, David? NSA, National Security Agency?
Worldwide, NSA, oh yeah, sorry, NSA, National Security Agency.
Yeah, well, not the Able Danger, it doesn't. Able Danger, NSA, and I want anybody under the age of 15 to block their ears. In our world, NSA means no strings attached. And I'll explain that to Clyde later, but a lot of our lady Able Danger agents, called Dangerettes, who are beyond childbearing years, understand the significance of no strings attached. And then, of course, the younger crowd, NSA, is something they put on social media to mean they want to hook up with no strings attached. But I don't know what that means because I'm too old. Plus, I have a bunch of young kids, and I'd hate to think they were thinking like that. So, David, Francie Haig will be widely covered in Chapter 25, as will be these seemingly unrelated terms: partition, Foreign Fugitive File Database, Interpol, USNCB, US DOJ, 1987 RCMP, and Interpol. There's a bunch of crying and boo-hooing in this country about Jamie Gorelick's wall, which went up between FBI and CIA. Well, Gorelick's wall is chump change compared to Marcy's wall, which went up between foreign interest and the U.S. intelligence. And I'm her only sibling, and that's me making that charge. What say you, my sister? David, over to you.
Yeah, absolutely right, Field. And I've just put up, or just about to put up, a little bit of background about Inkster, because this is very interesting. So by 1994, that's after the Waco massacre, the attempt to kill George Bush Sr. in Kuwait with a briefcase bomb that contained the atomized aluminum powder, which is their signature because they need the high temperature from the incendiary to destroy the evidence, and the bombing of the World Trade Center. So Norman Inkster is simultaneously in that period the 18th Commissioner of the RCMP, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and he's the President of Interpol. In 1994, he steps down from those two positions and he joins KPMG. So from 1994 to 2003, so that spans the attack on the Murrah building in Oklahoma City with the bomb under the daycare center, where, very interestingly, I would predict a guy called Norman Sack-Lieben, who's the explosive expert for the FBI, is now accused, and that seems to have gone quiet, of making or distributing child pornography. So anything he might have been able to tell us about what really happened in that Murrah building has gone silent. Back to Norman Inkster. From 1994 to 2003, he was a partner with KPMG in Toronto, the latter part of which he was global managing partner of the forensic practice. So he was overlapping with your budding career as a forensic economist. Is that right, Phil?
I was busy talking with the ladies about minced onions and no strings. What was the question in a laconic fashion?
From 1994 to 2003, he, Norman Inkster, was a partner with KPMG in Toronto, the latter part of which he was global managing partner of the forensic practice. So my question to you is, I believe you were starting to learn about forensic economics about then, so maybe you were overlapping with Norman Inkster.
No, I'm way ahead of him. Do you happen to know, David, what the #1 uh, economics book in U.S. colleges and even some high schools? I took economics in 66, 67 at Punahou. Do you have any idea what surname wrote the book on economics, generally regarded to be the best primer on economics for college or bright high school students?
I don't remember the name, but I think he was your tutor, right?
No, my tutor was Harley H. Heinrichs, and when I say my tutor, that's that's Tutor, not Tooter, as in Rudy Giuliani likes to toot on Obama's flute. No, my tutors are academics that tried to get me to be serious and learn something, and I made that a challenge for my instructors. But I bet you somebody in the chat room, before I blurt out the answer, David, let me see if anybody in the chat room has put up who wrote Economics 101. No, don't see it. Okay, David, the name on the economics textbook, most people in high school, if they go to a really good high school, which would be about 3 or 4 left in the United States, or if they take Economics 101 in college, the name who wrote the book is McConnell. Does that surprise you?
No, Phil.
Okay, do you remember what I majored in at Annapolis from 67 to 71?
Economics.
Yeah, and this is really interesting. It's also 100% accurate. I'm holding my hand up here. Oh, that's my left hand. Now my right hand's on my left side. I swear this is true, and I swear on a stack of, he has one Bible, I could reach over and grab it, but most of you know I'm telling you the truth when I say that in my entire 4 years at Annapolis, I got all A's in economics. That's true, except for one. I got a B in one. David, you can't make this kind of stuff up. The only course in economics, and I'm not bragging because it's easy, that's why I took it. I thought it was home economics, actually. The only course that I got a B in, and the instructor was a jerk, not because he gave me a B, just because that's the way God created him. He was a jerk. But he taught a very dry course called the economic history of labor relations. Now, isn't that interesting that in 1969, I'm getting a B in labor relations, and in 2008, 9, and 10, the U.S. Department of Justice is getting an F in their prosecution of the labor relations between Field McConnell Northwest pilot and civil case 1:08-1600 RMC, which is simply, this case is so simple. I had a contract with the Airline Pilots Association. They would take 2.5 to 5% of my income and use it against me. And that's exactly what they did. When I filed a case against Boeing and Airline Pilots Association for allowing the illegally modified Boeings to be a risk to the flying public, the Boeing Corporation immediately satisfied me. That's a legal term. ALPA has not satisfied me yet, but there's an old cliche in forensic economist work that he who laughs uproariously last laughs uproariously best. ALPA keeps digging themselves in deeper and deeper, and if anybody read chapter 24 and had their glasses on and was paying attention, when the aircraft landed in Atlanta at the end of the chapter, something was digging in deeper and deeper due to the sudden impact of the aircraft on the runway. And that brings us around to how God micromanages our efforts. Unbeknownst to you, David, and I'm not making this up, somebody's about ready to put up the link as soon as I blurt it out. Last night in New York City at LaGuardia Airport, which is one of the 3 worst in the country to land at, I can get into that, but why bother? Alpa didn't care. A Southwest Airlines jet was on an unstabilized approach. So at 400 feet above the runway, the captain takes the aircraft away from the co-pilot and lands it so hard he collapses the nose wheel and injures 16 passengers. Let's back this up. Now we're out here, we're 400 feet above the ground, like this. Here's the runway. The captain sees the co-pilot is AFU, just like Obama and Operation Blackjack, which reminds me, somebody needs to pay attention because at 1 minute after midnight in England tonight, if the explosions set for the United States do not take place, we get braggers' rights, and Obama and Cameron look like the inept cowards that the world is increasingly learning that they are. So last night at New York City, LaGuardia Airport, at 400 feet in the dark above the runway, the captain realizes the co-pilot's about ready to kill everybody. On the count of 3, what should the captain have done? The captain should have kept his hands off the controls and said, go around. And if the idiot in the right seat did not go around, he should say one more time, go around. And if he doesn't go around that time, then he's well within his rights to smack him in the head to wake him up while he takes control of the aircraft, and he goes around. What this poor pilot did is what a lot of other pilots do every day. They gamble that they can salvage something that somebody else screws up. As you can see, well, I gambled for 39 years. Most of those years, God was taking care of me. Before that, I was just lucky, I guess. But last night in New York City, there were 16 people injured because the Southwest captain did not cause the aircraft for which he had signed for to go around. And the proper way to get it to go around is to tell the pilot flying or the pilot that's letting the autopilot fly to go around. If the autopilot's got the airplane, all the co-pilot had to do is push the go around button. Let me show you how easy that is. Okay, see all these buttons here? I just pushed one. You push one button on any of these modern airplanes that are really drones, and the aircraft will go around. What does that mean? Well, remember they're at 400 feet? Had he pushed the button when the captain said, what the captain didn't say go around, he's going to pay for that. Unfortunately, 16 people already paid for it with broken bones and worse. You push the button, the airplane will automatically rotate to probably, depending on the type of airplane, 15 to 18 degrees of pitch, and it'll go to full power, which is called takeoff or go-around power. Some would say it's max power. Doesn't matter. The aircraft rotates, goes to full power, and starts to accelerate and climb aggressively away from the terrain. If you were a passenger and some captain broke your femur, would you want to ride on that airline again? Because you might think that their training is so horrid that all the captains would break your femurs. The truth is, there's good airlines, there's bad airlines. There's airlines that have good training, and I'll name one right now, and I'm not sucking up to them. In fact, I'll name several just to keep it so I'm not sucking up. El Al, the Israeli airline, Lufthansa, the German airline, KLM, Delta in the United States of America. I can't remember the name of the New Zealand airline right now, but it's a funny bird, I think. It's not a Kiwi. But anyway, Air New Zealand, that's the name. And the Australian airline, too. In fact, the Australian airline, whatever they're called, it has an A in it. David, do you know what it's called? The Australian airline that's so good?
Ansett.
No, that's a regional. Anset's a regional.
Qantas?
Yeah, Qantas. QUA, that means Queensland and Northwest Territories, whatever. Up until they had a recent incident with an A380, I believe, they were the company that gone the longest without a problem. So they're very good. The only reason I mentioned Delta is because I was in their training environment for 29 years, and they did not cut corner on training. In other words, if I was on an Airbus or a DC-10 and I needed some more instruction or some more time, I got it. If I was a complete idiot, I wouldn't pass. For 29 years, I passed. Then when I started talking about the illegally modified aircraft of 9/11, the Department of Justice asked Northwest to tell me to shut up. Northwest told me to shut up. Unfortunately, because our wages had been reduced 40% after 9/11, and my retired, the contractual retired amount was 60% of the final average earnings of my best 60 months ever. That's 5 years. So it's called cherry picking. You take the 60 months where you gross the most amount, you take 60% of that, and then you don't let the door hit you in the butt on the way out as you go into the retired force. In other words, to leave the math out of it, the day I retired in the 10-minute decision, my income did not go down because I had earned a retirement under the pre-9/11 earnings, and I took my retirement after they dropped the wages to 60%. So the Department of Justice shot themselves in the foot. Northwest didn't have a horse in the race because it was not their decision to try to get me to be quiet. In fact, to be truthful and respectful to Northwest and now Delta Airlines, they knew exactly what I was involved in, they being Northwest Airlines, and I continued to be carried on the payroll until March 13th of 07 in the highest pay capacity. And this doesn't mean jack diddly to me, I could care less. But the truth is, I was in the highest level of earnings of any pilot at Northwest Airlines, and Northwest Airlines was very supportive of our collective investigation into the flying events of 9/11 and the illegal modifications of the 9/11 jets, including American 11, American 77, United 175, United 93, and all 4 of their drone replacements. So Northwest and I parted company in a 10-minute decision, and I asked permission from my spouse, and she was more interested in getting me retired than I was. But I wasn't getting retired because I was lazy. I was getting retired because I could not continue to fly airplanes legally. And if CCW, which is John Prukup, if John Prukup or Jack Mack were to put in FAA regulation 121.533, so that's FAA Fox Alpha Alpha 121.533, it says no captain of any U.S. registered airliner is authorized to put that aircraft in motion if he has any concerns about the safety of the flying vehicle. Oh, okay. So here I come, Field McConnell, Boeing 747-400 captain, and I learned that they all have Boeing uninterruptible autopilots. So I take my great big, this is where I really went wrong. I'd never cracked a book in 29 years. And I decided at the end of my career, maybe I should be responsible and read the book. Boy, that was a bad choice. I read the whole thing, and then I did a bunch of self-study because I was at home with a hernia. So I learned the whole 747, then I never got to fly it because when I figured out what they'd done on 9/11 and I shared that with Northwest, Northwest liked it, Department of Justice didn't. So they told me to shut up. And then somebody else told me to shut up. On the 13th of December of 2008, I was in an incident at an airport. It'll take me a while. Oh yes, Aterau. Maybe somebody can find out how to spell it. It's in Kazakhstan. I think it's Ateryau. It used to be a training base for the Russian Air Force. Now it's just a big city about 800 miles west of Astana, the capital. And I was taking off in moderate snow there, and I wasn't touching the airplane. The Russian co-pilot named Eddie, he had a difficult to pronounce last name like Shashkavili, but it wasn't Shashkavili. But Eddie was flying the airplane. It rotated at 100 knots. Well, when I looked at 100 knots, we were 40 feet in the air. So just like the co-pilot and captain last night in New York, the captain should have said go around. I didn't have time to speak. I grabbed the side controller and I pushed the nose forward. Now remember we were taking off at night, we're 40 feet above the ground? Yeah, well we were also about 40 knots too slow to stay in the air. So I knew just from a lot of experience in a lot of different airplanes that we were going to die pretty soon. And not feeling like dying in Kazakhstan, because just think of the enormous expense of Northwest Airlines to get my remains back to Fargo for a funeral. I decided, well, to save Northwest the cost of taking my remains halfway around the world, I'll just save the airplane. So I pushed the stick full forward. So Eddie over there, the Russian-speaking co-pilot who knows the procedures but has no experience, he thinks I'm trying to kill him. So he takes his stick, really bad idea, this Airbus crap. I think about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we put up an airplane flying into the trees, and it was the best pilots that Airbus had, demonstrating how safe their airplanes are, because you don't even have to be an accomplished pilot to fly them safely. And their 2 test pilots flew right into the forest. Bet you'd like to have that YouTube back, Airbus. So anyway, I'm trying to push it down, and even if we'd hit the runway, we would have been safer than continuing up. Because if we continue up, in fact, somebody's going to get the cabal. In Afghanistan, in April this year, a 747 took off, and the camera that just happened to be on the airplane sees it go up, 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 and then it sort of stands still, and then the right wing falls, and the pilot gets a hold of it, and the left wing falls, and the pilot gets a hold of it, and the nose is coming down, but not fast enough. And then it rolls over in the right wing, and guess what happens when you run out of airspeed? It goes like this, and they knew they were dying. And the reason I know they knew they were dying is right before they hit, the captain dropped the landing gear. Now, he wasn't dropping the landing gear because he was hoping they might land. He knew they weren't going to land, but he thought he could break the vertical descent in increments by throwing some more trash out there. But they all died. Did it have to happen? No. Did the 16 people have to get injured last night in New York City? No. Had the captain done the right thing there, he would have said go around, and nobody would have heard about this flight. On the 13th rather, of December of '08, I've got it if anybody wants to see the paperwork, me and the co-pilot are sitting there arguing over who's flying the airplane because we both have sticks, and he doesn't speak good English, which is not his fault. He didn't grow up in England or America. He grew up in Kazakhstan. He spoke fluent Russian. He spoke enough Kazakhstan to get a beer from a Kazakh beer seller, but he didn't know what I got it meant in English. So after 2 cycles of this kind of stuff where we're about ready to kill and it's nobody's fault except Airbus's, this guy was not little and I'm not that big, but I basically pushed his left shoulder and I shoved his head right up against the glass. And when his head hit the glass, he realized, I think he wants to fly the airplane. So then I flew the airplane to 10,000 feet and my little heart was going pitter-pat. Not because I was afraid of what lay in front of me, but I realized how close we'd come to crashing. And I don't think in the scenario where we run out of airspeed and crash, we would have probably been killed. If we'd hit the ground because I pushed the nose down, we wouldn't have been killed. We would have sheared some landing gear off and we would have come to a happy rest on a snowy runway, and we would have gotten out of the aircraft and said, gee, I'm really sorry about your airplane, taken a taxi and drank some beer. So David, I can't remember exactly how we got started on this, but did you ask me a question?
I think we went off into the economic world field, or that was a little before. And while you were talking about economics, I remember at Cambridge in my 3rd year of the engineering degree, I did principles of industrial management, and I got into economics. I could not make sense out of it at all, because for me, when you're talking about gross national product, et cetera, it's really, the classical economics is all about a scalar quantities with no direction. And something that's always fascinated me about your flying skills is you, through the seat of your pants, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're dealing instinctively, almost with muscle memory, in 5 dimensions. Do you remember what those dimensions are?
No, but let me try. There are the dimensions azimuth, latitude, longitude, heading, roll, pitch, yaw, time, elevation, or any combination thereof?
Yeah, I think azimuth and speed, and 3 dimensions, elevation and latitude and longitude. But for example, you, I believe, would have an instinctive feel as you approach a landing strip at what elevation you're at within probably 5 or 6 feet accuracy, whereas a less experienced pilot wouldn't. And when we're dealing with organized crime, and particularly with explosives, we need to be looking at the nature of the explosive to describe or represent the distribution of the debris. So let's just take a look back to the mens rea or guilty mind in the Department of Justice that can mobilize or deploy some of the world's greatest experts in improvised explosive devices in, for example, the Marine barracks in Beirut, the attack on the World Trade Center in 1993, and the bombing in Oklahoma. And this is speaking terrorist expert Neil C. Livingstone was quoted in the Globe on May the 16th, 1995, with this observation. There is a remarkable similarity between the method used by the Islamic terrorists in the bombing of the Marine barracks in Beirut, the attack on the World Trade Center, and the bombing in Oklahoma. The truckload of explosives is almost a signature or calling card, and it is the weapon of choice among these groups. Livingstone, the author of several books on terrorism, continued, very typically, these terrorists have found homegrown radicals to use as dupes in the actual bombings. They have supplied the money and the technical expertise and highly skilled operatives to guide a project and then get out of town before they can be apprehended. I'll guarantee on my 70th birthday, Phil, that the operatives moving through the World Trade Center attack and the bombing in Oklahoma City, their names will occur in the foreign fugitive file in the custody of your sister, Jamie Gorlick, and Janet Reno in the Department of Justice. And on October the 22nd, 1996, 2 months before the attack on little John Benet Ramsey of Christmas Day, they celebrated the technologies which would allow them to launch the attack in the East Africa embassies, USS Cole and 911. And those three technologies were Sentry, which is a land customs office speed passing operation. Then two other technologies that, in my opinion, were plugged into the foreign fugitive files in the Department of Justice. One of those is called JABS. JABS stands for the Joint Automated Booking
Station.
System.
Station.
No, it's actually a system field, I think.
Oh, I was busy watching the 747 crash. Sorry.
Okay, developed by Nortel for the CAI private equity group. And what that does, it allows your sister and Norman Inkster, and we're talking, back in the run up to the attack on US. Sorry, I got to just steal something. Can you take over for a minute, Phil, please?
I've been taking over for 7 years. Yeah, come back when you get settled down. Meanwhile, Sentry, Jabs, and a whole bunch of other junk. Anita, or did I say Anita? Of course I didn't. You think I said that. Your dog's barking again. For CCW out there, I'm watching this video right now. In fact, you know what? As long as David's gone, let's all watch this video. This is what I was just describing, and I'll try to talk over the noise of the video. This is the aircraft rolling off on its left wing, and now we'll start moving again, I think. Oh yeah, I pushed the wrong button. Here we go. Okay, now it's falling off on his right wing. Now his nose is going low. Now he realizes they're dead, so he throws the gear out. Whoops, a little late. Okay, what caused that? Not inexperienced pilots. Let me see if I can turn it off here. No, that's the wrong button. Oh, maybe I have. Anybody know what button I pushed to shrink this thing? Oh, look, once they're dead, they're pretty much dead. There we go. Hang in there, people. I'll take control of this TV, or my name isn't Barry Swatero. You know, there's a button that makes that shrink go down. I thought it was the escape button. You don't remember what it is, do you? There's a little one, not there. Now I got to, this is great. You guys are my witness. I'm losing control of my computer, which is okay. You know, there we go. Got control of my computer. What you see there is the unfortunate consequence of either poor training or pilots that are not in good shape to be flying, whether it's because of sleep deprivation, which oftentimes it is, or for some other reason, which seldom it is. In this case,
Were they taking off or landing?
they were taken off. That was a good question, and that was from Clyde, and he's right over here, still engaged. But David, if you're back, just hang on. I'm going to explain what the people have just seen after I go back to the chat room to see if you're back from your mission. And I don't see you back yet. What you saw there was a head-on shot of a 747, and the name of the company, the operator, was National Air Service or something like that. They're out of Detroit. On that day in history, which was April something of 2013, they had 3 747-400 freighters. That's how many they had before the airplane took off. When the airplane crashed and killed everybody, they had 2. That airplane goes down the runway. Unbeknownst to them, as it was going down the runway, the cargo was starting to strain against the cargo holdback devices that keep it from moving aft. Isn't the only case of this that killed people, but the other case is worse. It's Aero Air 185. Maybe that's not right. It was Aero Air, Goose Bay, Labrador, 1985. And they had the same thing happen where they had to create a crash to kill a bunch of U.S. military people that knew way too much about pedophilia and one of the governments over in the Middle East or Southern Europe. But I digress. The airplane's going down the runway. It was a cargo airplane, by the way, not a passenger 747. Some of the cargo is starting to get loose in the back, and then it's exacerbated, which is a big word for Marine, isn't it? When the nose comes off, okay, now in addition to the acceleration forward, and remember the thing about an object at rest will stay at rest unless under the influence of an outside force, basically. And the outside force initially that has now I have a pen on my hat or my hand, and as you accelerate forward, the pen wants to go back, but there's holdback devices that keep it right there. But now that you go like this, not only is the acceleration, because the aircraft is accelerating, but now there's an incline of maybe 15 degrees. Towards the end of that, go back and look at the film yourself. They probably got 25 to 30 degrees of body angle on that airplane as the crew is trying to figure out why they can't control it. Well, the reason they can't control it is the airplane had a bunch of wheeled vehicles in it. And these airplanes can take off around 1 million pounds, and they may have as much as 400,000 pounds of wheeled vehicles. Well, when one thing broke loose and went backwards, if it was at the front of the cargo area, everything behind it's going to break loose and go backward. That's what happened. So this cargo airplane that usually has its cargo balanced, like my pen is balanced across the length of my fingers, suddenly all the cargo is in the tail end, which makes the airplane want to do this. And the airplane is going to do that no matter what the pilots do, no matter what the technology does. And unfortunately for these pilots, I have no idea who they were, but my 2 friends that were over there working for the same company were Gary Wilshire and Gordon Gibson. They certainly had the experience to where if they were in an airplane that starts going like this, they wouldn't have tried to get the nose down. Now, most of you think, well, if the nose being up is the problem, just push the nose down. Well, the problem is you can't do that. But what you can do is when the nose is going up uncontrollably, go ahead and let that forward momentum keep the aircraft mass going forward, but then just roll over 90 degrees. Because what that does, when you roll over 90 degrees, you no longer are creating lift nor even attempting to create lift, and the nose will fall down. And then if you're really lucky and you time it right and you roll fast enough, you'd get it back at a normal angle where you could fly forward, except for one thing. even if you were lucky enough or fast enough or good enough, all the cargo is still in the tail end, and they were doomed from the minute the cargo let loose. Now that's a system error. It's still a regrettable loss of 7 or 8 lives. But last night in New York, had the captain simply instructed the co-pilot to go around, there's 16 people that wouldn't have sore legs today. David, are you back? David?
Yes, I am, Phil.
Oh, you are. Okay, good. Well, I forgot what you were talking about because it was putting me into phase 3 rapid eye motion sleep. But it's 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock. It's 3 o'clock, so we can go as long as you want, or we can stop whenever you want. It's been 2 hours so far, but what do you want to take off on now?
Well, it's a thought. I mean, we normally do 3 hours and go till 2. I'm happy to go till 2 my time. That's 4 o'clock your time. Is that all right?
Yeah, it's fine with me. And Clyde doesn't matter because he knows the way out, but I think Clyde will hang around. Let me ask him. Clyde, are you hanging around till the last dog? Clyde's just told me in perfect Greek, because it's a secure environment. We have this fellow here from Sardonia, and he speaks Italian but not Greek. So Clyde and I have been speaking in Greek, so the guy from Sardonia doesn't know what we're talking about. But he said, basically, being laconic, as am I, he said, yep. So we're good until the last dog is hung, assuming we hang the dogs at 4 o'clock or earlier. David, over to you.
Okay, so let's carry on with the role of Norman Inkster after joining KPMG and becoming the global partner for forensics, whatever that means. So in 1995, when he starts in his new position, Christine Marcy is the senior counsel for the detention and deportation program of the Immigration and Naturalization Service, and a year later, she's going to get the Gore Hammer Award for launching JPATS, which transports felons and aliens around the country, in and out of the country, bypassing the customs and protection system that ordinarily would stop terrorists or fugitives from entering the United States, taking on a false identity, as in the case of Barack Obama, and preparing sleeper cells to be launched in an attempt to overthrow the government of the United States, which has to be orchestrated basically by someone like General Alexander Haig because of his battlefield experience and his pretensions as a human being. So now, how does Norman Inkster, working for KPMG, conceal these contract killings? Well, he uses a technique developed in the United Kingdom over centuries, known as the deployment of 6s and 7s. And 6s and 7s was the term given to a scene that's in chaos. And some people, and I think it's very plausible, associate 6s and 7s with the livery companies that are either 6th or 7th in the Lord Mayor's procession, which goes back to, I believe, the 12th century in London. And the two livery companies are the Worshipful Company of Skinners and the Worshipful Company of Merchant Tailors. And sometime in the 15th century, they started fighting with each other and killing significant members of each other's livery company over who should be 6th or 7th in the Lord Mayor's procession, because they were both formed or received their letters patent from the King on the same day. So the Lord Mayor of London, that's the city, the square mile, very Solomonic decision, said, all right, I think it's St. Crispin's Day, which is around Easter, maybe Clyde knows about that. On St. Crispin's Day, the livery company that was 6th becomes 7th, and the livery company that was 7th becomes 6th. And somehow into that structure crept in this phrase, 6s and 7s. Well, what we see at crime scenes, such as the Murrah building, and the murder of John Benet Ramsey on Christmas Day of 1996, and the attack on the USS Cole in Aden Harbor of 2000, and the 9/11 attack, each crime scene, you can see someone is going in and taking away or manipulating evidence left by the other team. And both of those teams, and this is the hypothesis that goes to the core of our civil case that's about to be filed, I believe, Bill. It goes to the core of the civil case that the people who control the database that administer the two teams are responsible either negligently, recklessly, willfully, or fraudulently for the wrongful death of the people who die as a result of that chaos, that organized chaos, of which your US Naval Academy classmate of 1971, Captain Chick Burlingham, is a stellar example. And the little 6 or 7-year-old girl, John Benet Ramsey, is another. And what KPMG was doing under Norman Inkster, it was providing an escrow service to spread bettors. So you talked a bit about your pension fund, Field, that in your particular case was relatively well protected. For many people, that hasn't been the case, and they've had catastrophic losses in their pension fund. And most of those losses, I believe, we will be able to attribute to the malignant and malicious operations of KPMG through what are known as abusive tactics.
Hey, David, can I jump in with a rare, intelligent comment?
Please.
Value and energy are not increased or decreased. They are just changed from one form or account to another. And all of the money that was obligated to be paid to all the United, US Air, and Delta pilots that was not paid to them goes in some form into the pockets of the attorneys and the judges who rammed that crap through the court. And the crap in the court in Chicago, with no disrespect to crap meant by comparing them to the Chicago courts, the judge in the United Airlines bankruptcy who approved it is named Eugene Wiedorf. Let me spell that so everybody can Google him and make him know how much we appreciate him. Echo Uniform Golf Echo November Echo Eugene Wiedorf. Whiskey Echo Delta Oscar Foxtrot Foxtrot. I can't remember because I'm getting to be a geriatric if he was given $10 million to stick it to United or $40 million. But even though Eugene Wiedorf was in Chicago facilitating the fraudulent bankruptcy of United Airlines, his $10 to $40 million slush fund was held in accounts in Arizona. So sorry to interrupt, David, but you also asked about St. Crispin's Day. And of course, you know, my memory's a little foggy, but I think back in the back of my mind, I think St. Crispin's Day falls on the 25th of October and is the feast day of the Christian saints Crispin and Crispinian, also known as Crispinus and Crispianus, though the spelling is falling out of favor because it's too much like anus, which is exactly like Inkster, who looks like a sphinxter. That's off the top of my head. The twins who were martyred in 286. It is a day most famous for the battles that occurred on it, the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, the Battle of Balaklava, charge of the Light Brigade. In fact, David, maybe you know half a league onward, charge of the Light Brigade, something or other. I don't remember that one, but anyway, and during the Crimean War was the charge of the Light Brigade and the Battle of Lady Gulf in the Pacific Theater in 1944. The Battle of Agincourt was dramatized by William Shakespeare in Henry V, featuring St. Crispin's Day speech in which Henry inspired his much outnumbered English forces to fight the French, saying, "The fewer men, the greater the share of honor." Gee, what a great liar he was. The feast day of Saints Crispin and Crispinian is 25 October. However, these saints were removed by the liturgical calendar, but not declared no longer to be saints. During the Catholic Church's Vatican II reforms, the reasoning used by Vatican II for this decision was that there was insufficient evidence that St. Crispin and Crispian actually existed. The feast remains as black letter Saints' Day in the calendar of the Anglican Book of Common Prayer, 1662, and a commemoration in common worship of 2000. So David, even though I happen to be the guy that found that, don't put pressure on yourself to try to come up with all the answers. We happen to have the world's fastest and most legal chat room, and we can call upon anybody anytime and they'll deliver. So there you are. And if one of the dangerettes would remind me that Crispin and Crispinian are so close to Crispy and St. Peter's that I'll put the song Pied Piper in chapter 25. And because a lot of the people in America and England and around the world are a bunch of lemmings following a Pied Piper, or in the case of the FAA administrator, whose name I've almost forgotten, but it'll come back to me. I can pitch, oh, you know, Hank Duffy was first. Well, anyway, I forgot who the FAA administrator was who got caught driving drunk in January of 2012. And of course, the reason he was drinking so much in January 2012, and his name will probably come to me when I talk about the videotape we put up, but we put a videotape of this guy. Oh, yes, it came up instantly. If you trigger your brain, they still work. We had a videotape of two monkeys, dare I say erect primates, breeding on the hood of a moving Peugeot. So I put that, because I like to deploy this stuff in a threatening and humorous fashion, I claim that was a video of Randy Babbitt, the FAA administrator, and John Prater, the president of the Airline Pilots Association. And even though it wasn't, it may as well have been, because these guys were in receipt of information of what happened to all the dead passengers on the morning of 9/11. And how do I know they were in receipt? Because I gave it to them, and I also put it in civil case 1:08-1600 parentheses RMC. And sometimes people probably think that I would get frustrated with a lack of progress. Nope, it's called pay you back with interest. Over time, the amount goes up, and the damages to them collectively, for instance, ALPA and the Federal Aviation Administration, if anybody wants to check with the current administrator of the FAA, his name is Michael Huerta, Huerta, and so it's michael.huerta, Huerta, at FAA.gov. You can just email him and say, hey, Mike, you ever heard about civil case 1:08-1600, parentheses RMC? He won't answer you. He hasn't answered me. But see, we don't need answers, and we don't need action, because this is all within God's control. And even though he lets things go bad for a while, he will overrule these people at some point if that's in the interest of his kingdom. We know it's in the interest of we, the common people, so all we can do is do our job, throw gasoline on the little forest fires and turn them into a raging inferno, which will consume the enemies of God. David, over to you.
Yeah, and the nice thing is the enemy is focused people. You're sitting and Norman Inkster, and I think we outdo them spiritually, psychologically, and perhaps physically, or at least we outshoot them. But there's an interesting comment from, I think it was Sherlock, wondering if all the prison breakouts in the Mideast is all about sending them to fight in Yemen, Syria, etc., with the goal of creating Islamist caliphates. Well, you're absolutely right, but the goal is not to create Islamist caliphates. It's to disturb and disrupt the governments of those previously sovereign states. And Interpol has announced that all of the people that were involved in the breakouts, they have incorporated their names in, although they might not use exactly the same words, the foreign fugitives file at the Department of Justice in custody of Field Sister, or at least historically in the custody of Field Sister. What that means is those people were released from the jail, because that's what happened. They didn't escape, they were released. They joined a force that can now be deployed by KPMG in events where spread betting takes place. So I think today, Field, technically, I don't understand all this, is the moon sighting day, which determines the technical end of Ramadan. Are you familiar with that terminology?
Nope, but once again, I don't have to be. Ramadan ends at 23:59 tonight, the 7th of August, and I was once over in the Muslim part of the world, and that would have been Istanbul, Turkey, during Ramadan. And I think that Obama and what's his name, Cameron, had hoped to stir up some trouble over in Yemen, Syria, maybe Goodyear, Arizona, maybe Yellowstone, maybe Assumption Parish, maybe Indianapolis. They have a couple of exercises going on in the U.S. right now, and we're blocking those exercises with the truth. The visible exercise on this hand is called Operation Blackjack, which I think we could have handled with Operation Whitejack or Operation Half Blackjack. But you know, you don't want to get too crazy because these people in Washington aren't that bright, frankly. So they've got Operation Blackjack over here. They think that we don't notice that they have Operation Vibrant Response over here. Well, if you go back to chapter 24 that went up 18 hours or 19 hours ago, Abel Danger had blocking operations to block their Operation Blackjack. And once again, I think Jack Mack put the quote, but it said Barack Obama totally, let's see, Barack Obama's control of Operation Blackjack was totally AFU. Then they have this other thing that we're not supposed to know about, which is Operation Vibrant Response. Hope you're not easily offended. So in chapter 24, we had Operation Vibrator Response, because we know who has all the power and most of the testosterone in Washington, D.C. It's Valerie Jarrett, Hillary Clinton, Chris Marcy, Francie Hakes, Courtney Banks Spaeth, and then they've got somebody that thinks she has power and she doesn't, but her name's Paula Reed. Notice I didn't say any men's names. There aren't any men in our government that have any power that I'm aware of. You got a bunch of Homo sapiens that just, you know, play with themselves all day, and I'm speaking about McCain, Lindsey Graham, might as well be Lindsey, what's his name of the Fleetwood Mac? Oh, Lindsey Buckingham. These people in the government that just stay there forever, thinking that we the people will not find out what they've been doing and hold them accountable. I think they're collectively a bunch of daydream believers. And I just want to point out that the guy who wrote Daydream Believer, now I'm checking my own memory. I was going to say he's from Arizona. I might be wrong on that. So David, while I go check and see exactly who wrote Daydream Believer, I'll be right back. So you take it over, and I'm sending an email to CCW to ask him to please send me Long Cool Women with a Black Dress. I think I can retrieve it off this, but I'd like to use that in chapter 25 if I get it. David, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. So I just observe Ramadan is observed by Muslims as a month-long period of fasting from sunrise to sunset. The beginning and end of Ramadan are marked by the lunar Islamic calendar. The date varies slightly each year, and observance of Ramadan varies between countries. In Kuwait, people sing the holiday Eid will be celebrated on Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday in many countries, with families gathering to exchange presents and sit down for meals. And apparently it's related to the observation of the new moon. Anyway, either way, so let's come back to KPMG. KPMG is a criminal organization structured and corrupted by Norman Inkster when he joined it in 1995, aided and abetted by Christine Marcy, who used KPMG to arrange an auction of non-performing small business administration loans for companies engaged in some of the most important strategic work with major defense contractors, including, for example, in installing a cesium fountain clock in the Boeing Nightwatch aircraft used on 911, which allowed those aircraft to provide Stratum 0 timing signals to the red team and blue team factions engaged in the attempted overthrow of the government of the United States. What does that mean? That means if you provide Stratum 0 signals to the red team and deprive the blue team of access to the most precise timing signals, the blue team's communication will be degraded and in the limit actually fail. so that the blue team will be unable to respond appropriately to a red team attack, which might be divided up into slots of 5 minutes for the team, 5 minutes for the blue team. And remember, the goal of the red team is to attack, and when it's not attacking, remove evidence of the blue team's attack. And the blue team role is to attack, and when it's not attacking, to remove or disrupt evidence that might otherwise reveal to the public what's really going on of the red team. And that technique goes back way before cesium clocks were invented, and I think that was invented at the National Physical Laboratory in Teddington in Middlesex around 1955 or whatever. But it goes back to the 15th century, I suggest, when, I don't know what they called them back then, but there were people presumably investigating crimes, just somewhat similar to what we try to do today, using common sense and intelligence. And whether you were a red team player or a blue team player, or whether you were a member of the worship company of Skinners or the worship company of Merchant Tailors, the logic of being retained as two factional teams to go into a crime scene, and when one kills the other disrupts, and when the other kills the other, the first one disrupts, describes almost exactly what we can see hypothetically at the murder scene of little John Benet Ramsey. And this to me is where it gets very exciting, because little John Benet Ramsey was told by someone that she was going to get a visit from Santa Claus on Christmas Day. And she told her little friend, and her little friend told her little friend's mother, who said to John Benet Ramsey, "But John Benet, you know that Father Christmas comes on Christmas Eve." The little girl was absolutely convinced she was going to get a visit. Anyway, on Christmas Day, I don't know what time she goes to bed, but it would appear from a reverse engineering of the crime scene, arguing backwards or deductively, if you will, she went downstairs and let in Santa Claus. And Santa Claus would have been dressed in a robe, probably made under the supervision of the scriptwriter for the Worshipful Company of Merchant Tailors. Because back in the 15th and 16th century, that's what they did. They made robes for aristocrats and wealthy, and for peasants. And whatever or whoever she let in and went down to the basement willingly, probably gave her a little present, possibly a beaver toy, because at the crime scene, they find a pubic hair and a beaver hair, or maybe several pubic hairs and several beaver hairs. Well, there are little toys, I think they call them Corporal Flapjack, made out of beaver hair, which children love, made in Canada. But also the issue of a winter hat to the RCMP and the military in Canada. They call them Yukon hats. They're made out of beaver. Quite possibly such a hat would have been issued, since it was winter in Canada, to Russell Williams, who's a pedophile psychopath, who, when the police came to his cottage to look at his computer and discovered child pornography, he told them he would rather fight them all the way through the court, because he was accused of murder, than have them expose or investigate or continue with the examination of the child pornography on his computer. My guess is that child pornography would have traveled on a roundabout path, but essentially would have been distributed, subject to post-production work, and sold and transmitted over the StarNet Cisco technology confiscated from StarNet's premises in Vancouver on the 20th of August 1999 by the present commissioner of the RCMP, Bob Paulson, and his goons out of Ottawa. So what's amazing about the crime scene associated with JonBenet Ramsey, and I remind everyone that is a cold case, dates back to 1996, and today, this year is 2013, so it's 13 years, 14, 17 years ago, a little girl was garroted and tortured and murdered, and the crime scene was adjusted to make it look as though the parents were guilty. So for at least 5 years, the parents fought, well, Patsy Ramsey has died of cancer. The father is still alive, has struggled to maintain their reputation against a vicious and virulent and libelous attack by the mainstream media that doesn't have a collective brain between its ears. And the real killers are still out there, just as is the case with the Picton pig farm, where prostitutes were taken out and tortured on a public stage. I believe they were assaulted with chainsaws, and the cameras were whirring, and the hardcore pornography was sold over the internet, transmitted by companies like Cisco. So what is Norman Inkster doing? Well, Norman Inkster at that period, that's Christmas Day of 1996, is acting through KPMG as the escrow for spread bettors, where, let's say, for example, the book has been opened by a private equity group launched by General Alexander Haig, where the book is opened where, as a pension fund, perhaps the Boulder Municipal City Pension Fund or whatever, they're told by KPMG, which quite possibly acts as a consultant or tax or accounting service provider, that they are required to bet on exactly when little JonBenet Ramsey will cease breathing. And the important thing from the bookmaker's point of view, that is the private equity group started by General Haig, where co-investor is David Johnson, they have to look credible by being able to deliver the event within the spread. So some pension funds, I guess, are watching, their trustees, terrified, if you will, are watching the snuff film live of the killing of little JonBenet Ramsey, transmitted by whatever techniques using the satellite dish outside. And they placed their bets that she would be dead after midnight plus 5 minutes. And another group of pension funds, and all you have to do is strap a heart rate monitor on the child, I suppose, would be betting that she would be dead at 12 o'clock midnight on Christmas Day, more than 5 minutes less than that, i.e. 11:55 or anything up to 11:55. But the red team and the blue team at the crime scene, their job is to make sure that the little girl dies somewhere between midnight minus 5 minutes and midnight plus 5 minutes, with the red team pushing it towards the upper limit and the blue team bringing it close as possible to the lower limit. And they use a garrote. Now, I'm not a knot expert. Maybe someone in the chat room is a knot expert. But if you look at the picture of the garrote, it looks to me, and I looked up some trapper's knots, as though the person who tied the garrote around a paintbrush handle has a background either mountaineering or trapping. So what an interesting set of clues. The child believes she's going to get visited by Santa Claus, who could possibly be dressed by members of the worshipful company of merchant tailors. There's a beaver hair on the child's body that would be or could be associated with the worshipful company of skinners. the father is a senior person in the installation of the technology used by Christine Marcy and Norman Inkster in the development of the foreign fugitive files at the Pentagon and the Department of Justice. And the garrote, which when tightened would meant the little girl would die very quickly, hopefully putting her out of her agony at a very specific time. So they could time the moment of death of the little girl. Now, one of the things that was necessary, of course, was to make sure she didn't scream. So she was tasered twice. That's 50,000 volts, 3 centimeters apart for a little girl of 7 years old. So in 1996, who had been issued with tasers?
My sister's group.
The United States Marshal Service.
Yeah, and they had none of that telltale confetti.
You're dead on. The anti-felon identification device, when the taser stopped being a weapon because it was fired by explosives and became a security device because it was fired by compressed air, your sister and the Department of Justice realized that it might be used on their cronies by the good guys. Their cronies being the kind of people who helped stage the Days of Rage or the riots in Paris. So they introduced the obligation to include anti-felon identification material, which would spray confetti with numbers on it that would lead back to the source of the sale of the cartridge. But there are no reports. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. But there's no reports of the confetti that should have been found at that crime scene if they were used in the orthodox taser that Christine Marcy had equipped her marshals with. So someone went in, and this is a reasonable line of deductive inquiry, perhaps with a flashlight that would have fluoresced and indicated where each of these little bits of confetti are and taken them away. So who would have been able to manage communications at that crime scene to make sure that the red team would do its part in the killing and help take care of evidence of the blue team, and conversely the blue team would do its part in the killing, care of evidence of the presence of the red team?
Hey, David, hang on just a minute. David, fire hose. No, I'm not going ahead. Clyde is. He's got a bit you might consider. Here's Clyde.
Well, I'm thinking that if the matter that there was no confetti is an issue, they might have been using contact tasers, of which I have about 5 or 6. They don't penetrate. They're just a contact gadget. You contact the skin of the individual and press a button, and down he goes. No confetti involved.
What do you think about that, David?
It's possible, Clyde, but this was back in 1996, and it looks like the standard model of tasers issued, for example, for the marshals, they were driven by compressed air, so they may have done that. But there are on the little girl's belly and just behind the ear, or in front of the ear, there are the 2 scorch marks of the needles. Now, whether that would have the same kind of signature as what you just described, I don't know.
No, that would be the kind you're describing, the ones that actually penetrate. If she had marks on her body, penetration marks, then they weren't using the contact tasers that I was talking about.
Okay. So, well, yeah, thanks for that input. Now, so there we are. We've got a beaver hair, a pubic hair, a little girl who thinks Father Christmas is going to arrive, a garrote tied by an expert trapper type individual, and then the absence of the anti-felon identification that would normally be able to point to the source of the tasers that we used to silence her and stop her screaming, and that's 50,000 volts for a 6 years old. So it would be pretty effective. And then there's, well, the skull is fractured around. But I can't think, if ever Sherlock Holmes was resurrected, I'd love to think that I helped him get resurrected. But I can't think of a more intriguing set of clues for a cold case for America to get its collective teeth into. Now, whether collectively they want to get their teeth into, you know what, Phil, I don't care. I'm going to keep pushing ahead until we get the killers of John Benet Ramsey on death row. And if it happens to be your sister, so be it. But backing up, what technology and where was it developed would allow you to get in between the various parties who should have played an effective role at solving that crime. And principally, I think they would be filled the Boulder Police, the FBI, and the 9/11 service. So let's dial back to 1979 in Vancouver. In 1979 in Vancouver, McDonnell Detweiler and Associates, which built the software for the guidance of the planes on 911, and was controlled on 911 by the CAI private equity groups through Alexander Haig and David Johnson, the present Governor General, received a contract from the federal government to build a mobile radio system for fax and data and voice that would link the Vancouver police, the RCMP, and the 911 service, which was initiated, I believe, by AT in 1969, which incidentally points to the trip taken by Michelle Obama to Washington in 1991 with the Sidney Austin team representing ATT and Clipper encryption chip back up BC. Now, willingly or unwillingly, negligently, recklessly, or fraudulently, that technology introduced by McDonnell Detweiler in 1979 would have set up a foreign fugitive file network, if such existed, for man-in-the-middle attacks on the police forces whose jurisdiction overlap or underlap, depending on your point of view, and the standard 911 service, which prevails across Canada and the United States today. Because what you can do with that technology, when the panicked call from the mother comes in at 5 o'clock, when she's gone into the bedroom of her daughter and find her missing, whether or not, I can't remember, she'd read the ransom note at that time, maybe someone could find that out. All you need to do with the man in the middle of the attack is have that call intercepted by someone who represents themselves to Patsy Ramsey as the 911 dispatcher and say, "I'll take care of it, ma'am." So the real 911 dispatcher doesn't hear anything. But the 911 dispatcher associated with the red team, the blue team, and MI2, which is Marcy, Inkster, and Interpol, gets the message and sends it on to someone in the Boulder police who they know to be an entrapped and extortable pedophile, which could be, we don't yet have the proof, Detective Arndt, A-R-N-D-T, the woman with the googly eyes, who arrives at the crime scene, the John Bennett Ramsey household, fairly soon after. She's one of the first to arrive, and I believe one of the last to leave. Now, Field, we did this last week, but I think it's a good thing, well, on Monday. That woman, by then the ransom note would have been seen. She should have done something, and she didn't. What was it?
She should have called the FBI. It's protocol.
Right, and the fact that she didn't is either incompetent, and of course incompetence is a possible explanation, but the ramifications of not solving that case are actually existential for the United States of America, because by not solving that case on Christmas Day of 1996, when there were enough clues to hang a mockingbird, and that as a metaphor, I don't really know what it means, but that crime should have been solved within 1 week by any decent professional investigator.
Hey, David.
Yes.
Of course you don't know what that cliche means because you misquoted the cliche. But just to bash you over the nose with the newspaper, what cliche did you just utter?
To hang a mockingbird.
No, it's to kill a mockingbird.
I was just checking you were awake.
Yeah, okay, but do you know the significance of mockingbird and John McCain's treason?
Well, he was called songbird, not mockingbird.
Same difference because they were referring to Nightingale. And I'm going to put the camera on Clyde. He may not know this, but he's the oldest of the three of us in the room right now. There's two fellows here with me. Have you ever heard the story about a nightingale, that a young nightingale bird will never make noise until it hears the call of another nightingale? Have you heard this? Okay, that's an honest answer. And David, never shy away from an honest answer. None of us know everything, but we can all learn something from somebody somewhere. Have you ever heard that?
No.
No. The only reason I know it is somebody, when I was, I'd say about 1998, somebody said, hey, Field, you ought to read this book about McCain and some of the Naval Academy guys. It's called Nightingale Song. And I told somebody, I don't have time to go to the bathroom. I'm not going to read any book. And they said, no, you want to read this book because I don't think you respect McCain and you'll have a lot more reason not to respect him after you read Nightingale Song. The point of Nightingale and Mockingbird and McCain is that, yes, he was a songbird. He was telling the North Vietnamese a lot of information, but he's not the source of the information. He can only regurgitate or sing what somebody else scripts. So we got to look further up the food chain to find out who really was the problem when John McCain was captive of the North Vietnamese, where most of us Americans thought, oh, poor Lieutenant McCain, he's stuck in a jail cell, solitary. Let's look at the other side of that. If, by the way, one of the guys in the room here is a jail pastor, but if there is a prisoner who's in solitary, David, this is a test of your lucidity. How many people can see that prisoner who's in solitary confinement if they don't have a camera?
No one.
Very good. Okay, so everyone knows McCain's in solitary. If McCain is let out, quietly goes out of the prison, over to an apartment, and is in the company of two alleged female nurses, how many of the other prisoners would be aware that he was not in solitary?
None.
Okay, well, that about wraps it up for John Wetstart, the forest fire guy. He really offends me for lots of reasons, not just because he's a treasonous guy, but he's such a moron that he brags about being at the bottom of the Naval Academy class, and I think I recognize that picture, but I don't. Wrong. Time tunnel. Looks like something else, and I'll post the other picture in a minute. What type of a guy who's the son of a four-star admiral and the grandson of another four-star admiral, what type of a guy would brag about being the last guy in the class of 58 at Annapolis? And not only that, he's lying about that. Off the top of my head, there were 900 graduates in the class of 58 in Annapolis, and his class standing was 893. So he can't even get it right when he's bragging about being an idiot. David, over to you. I got to go Google a picture.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. So I just put up a picture of googly eyes Detective Arndt, who arrives at the crime scene at the John Bennett Ramsey house the day after Christmas and wanders around, but presumably doesn't get the response from the parents that she wanted. It is my opinion. Whether she participated, I don't know, but she was aware of what happened in the basement to the little girl, and that's where the little girl's body was. And what she desperately wanted, and she was running out of time, was not to follow up on the ransom note, which would have required her or her superiors to call in the FBI, because the moment the FBI arrived, at that stage, they did not control the FBI completely. Partially, yes, in particular through the foreign fugitive files held by your sister and the current KPMG forensic partner, Norman Inkster. But they couldn't guarantee at a random send of FBI agents that the FBI agents would not discover the conspiracy, which was a man-in-the-middle attack by corrupt members of the Department of Justice on the 911 system, the Boulder Police, FBI. So I believe sometime after lunch, she ran out of patience and she told, and obviously that begs the question, why wasn't she doing it? She's the detective. She told John Bennett Ramsey to keep searching the house. Basically, she practically, she didn't physically, forced him to go down into the basement, open the door in the basement, and discover the body that I believe she knew was already there. Now, why would she act like that? What does it mean that she's got googly eyes? Could mean something or could be nothing. But that woman, with my limited experience, well, now nearly 70 years on the face of this planet, she's lying through her frigging teeth. She's a psychopath, just like Homolka. So we've got the evidence, we've got the beaver hair, got from a winter uniform Yukon hat issued to the RCMP or the Canadian military, suggesting or pointing to the possibility that Russell Williams, the pilot, flew down a hit team on Christmas Day dressed in their NORAD Santa clothes to dupe the little girl into bringing them into the house. Camera crew, or at least a camera, a woman to write the ransom note, where she says on the ransom note, "We represent a small foreign faction." Well, dippity-doo. The terminology of a small foreign faction overlaps with the foreign fugitive files set up in the Department of Justice in 1987 by Christine Marcy, then or about to be the senior counsel for the detention and deportation program of the Immigration and Naturalization Service, and Norman Inkster, about to become the 18th Commissioner for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and in 1992, the President of Interpol. And at the time of the John Bennett Ramsey murder, the head of the KPMG partnership involved in forensic investigations around the world by a partnership that would subsequently, perhaps 10 years later, pay $454 million by way of a fine into the United States Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund, administered by Field's sister, Christine Marcy, and Eric Holder, since 1984.
David.
Go ahead.
456 million, and I'm not asleep. You said 454. That's a Chevy engine.
You're incredibly sharp, Field, and this is very gratifying because the woman behind the aunt and all the various other losers in Washington is Field's sister. So it's 1:44, so we've just got 15 minutes or so left. Let's just look at the big picture here. Now, a variety of people would argue, well, let's investigate that crime scene, find the principal suspects, bring them in front of a court, and charge them with homicide. And that's exactly what the red team and the blue team with KPMG and MI2 sitting behind it want you to do, because they know that they've created enough confusion at the crime scene that we'll never be able to find a jury that can convict beyond reasonable doubt. So although it's very tempting to accuse someone, just like people accusing George Bush, whatever, at 911, it's a major strategic error that they won't suck you into. What we have to do, and I think this is where Field has this incredible earth-shattering watershed opportunity to change the administration of justice in the United States, is say, apropos, and whether John Bennett Ramsey's case is the most powerful one to argue along these lines, or sometimes I switch between John Bennett Ramsey because it's a very easy profile to raise in the consciousness of the Americans. Most Americans, I would guarantee, if you ask them who Captain Chick Burlingham was, they wouldn't know, but Field knows. So which one, or possibly both, I don't really mind, but you want to get into something that you know you're going to win. So we could argue from a civil damages case that two public servants back then in 1987 negligently, recklessly, willfully, or fraudulently exhibiting ongoing misfeasance or malfeasance set up the Foreign Fugitive File database under the Deputy Attorney General in the United States Department of Justice to move fugitives or declare fugitives or identify fugitives to the American authorities and law enforcement people and prevent by such individuals on the mainland of America. But because they operated those filing systems negligently, recklessly, willfully, or fraudulently, they allowed
I got my shirt on.
They allowed foreign fugitives to enter the United States as these so-called Ida cells that were identified or being hunted down by Colonel Schaefer's, I think his name was, Abel Danger Group, set up by General Henry Shelton as a military counterintelligence unit. So my guess is, Field, is that General Henry Shelton's team in Able Danger was being surveilled by your sister and the former president of Interpol, Norman Inkster, and they got very concerned that they were getting close to the holy grail of the conspiracy, which is the Foreign Fugitive File database in the Department of Justice, which would have had all of the names of the people subsequently ascribed to the Al-Qaeda attack. So they shut it down.
No, they didn't.
Exactly, Field. Go on, carry on.
Yes, they didn't shut it down. They just caused it to migrate from full-time employees of the Department of Defense who had to shut up to keep their paycheck, and they transferred the dossiers. And you mentioned 5 files, David, and there's a 6th file out there that we haven't talked about. But all 6 of those files came to 3 places that I'm aware of and 2 that I'll mention. One's Able Danger, one's Boiling Frogs, and the other one we can talk about when we get into a court of our peers, and we're under an oath in a grand jury setting in the Lone Star State would be my first choice, Fargo, North Dakota my second, and the only court I wouldn't walk into is the Southeast District of New York, because they have some problems there. The problems with the Southeast District of New York are spelled Hellerstein and Comey. And for the chat room, does anybody know if Comey's been approved as the FBI director, or is that process still open? Because if it's still open, we might cover Comey in Chapter 25 in a way that he will not appreciate, which is just too darn bad. And notice I didn't say another word that starts with the same initial as my first name. David, over to you.
Yeah, that's right, Field. So back then, a few weeks ago, I thought Comey was a good guy to go after, but we can always pop him in or out of the Octopus at will. I think now the principal male of the Octopus, of the 4 adult male members, should be this guy, Norman Inkster. He's still alive, incredibly powerful position, 18th commissioner of the RCMP, and from 92 to 94, president of Interpol, and then 94 joins KPMG and becomes the senior partner for global forensic analysis of a company that is basically a racketeering, influenced, and corrupt organization, which paid $456 million into the United States Department's Asset Forfeiture Fund to try and stop your sister from prosecuting them throwing them a clink for the rest of their lives. So she was operating down the racket back then. But here's the interesting remedy for a civil action. So hypothetically, Field McConnell, pro se, on behalf of the Marines, brings a civil action for wrongful death associated with the 9/11 attack and the death of Captain Chick Burlingham, U.S. Naval Academy, 1971, associated with the negligent, reckless, fraudulent, or willful operation of the foreign fugitive file in the custody of the Department of Justice Attorney General or Deputy Attorney General, formerly Christine Marcy, where Interpol manipulated the content of those files to fool the Americans into thinking that people coming into the country were coming in with benign intent, and then allowing those individuals to participate in training exercises and false flag exercises such they could be plausibly attributed as guilty of the 9/11 attack. So that would be a civil claim for damages, pro se class action on behalf of the Marines, two individuals named, that's Christine Marcy, Field Sister, and Norman Inkster, and the KPMG operator of the escrow account for the spread betting and spot fixing. And KPMG, as operator of the escrow, would have had a very significant number of pension funds sitting either side of the spread, including the New York City Employees Retirement System, which handles firefighters, amongst others, and police, and the British Columbia Investment Management Corporation, which does similar things up in the province of British Columbia. So the poor, dumb, frightened, terrified trustees, which are serviced by KPMG as a major tax consulting and audit firm, they plonk hundreds of millions of dollars either side of the spread and pray that the action is within the spread.
Yeah, who do they pray to?
So, well, they pray to their gods, whoever they are, Phil.
There aren't any gods. And I published a picture of an Egyptian god called Min. Min had one leg, one arm, and a balancing device that the people in Egypt used to worship. There's only one thing worthy of worship, and it's not royals, and it's not money, and it's not power, and it's not criminal, and it's not evil. But anyway, enough about that. I'll cover that in chapter 25. I'm trying to put up a picture of Operation Mona Blue because she's going to be quite active in the next chapter. David, back to you.
Okay, so let's, assuming that we want to go at the Captain Chick Burlingham wrongful death, we know he died wrongfully. We know the scenario they want to pretend us to believe in as to how he died. But my guess is we'll find that KPMG, which was auditing the Pentagon books at the time, was serving as escrow for the spread betting on the body count in the Pentagon. And I was quickly looking at the number of deaths, and apparently there were 125 at the Pentagon, including Captain Gerald DeConto, the duty officer. So the way the spread betting would have worked, KPMG, which acts as an audit consulting firm for companies such as AMIC, defines with AMIC how many dead people it wants in the attack on the Pentagon. AMIC is doing the upgrade of Wedge 1. It's got the cable reels outside for the sighting lines for the incoming droned weapon to come through the first floor window between the eyes of Captain Gerald DeConto, and because that's the day they're commissioning the upgrade, they know precisely how many people will be present to be damaged by a proximity bomb inside the building, to be set off by a trigger event outside the building. And KPMG would handle the escrow from the pension funds, probably including the pension funds of Captain Gerald Oconto himself, and that includes, that really makes it pretty satanic that the pension fund trustees are actually betting on a body count that involves the death of one of their members. But I think they call that dead peasant life insurance. So for certain people, it's a good way of making money.
It's a way of cutting their losses.
I'm sorry?
It's a way of cutting their losses, because when Captain Gerald, when Chick Burlingame would have retired from American Airlines, he would have been given a lump sum. The American guys had a lump sum retirement. His lump sum retirement would have been probably over $2 million. Now, is that a good deal? Nope. Most people would say $2 million is a great deal. Okay, on the count of three, what type of interest can you generate in investments right now that's secure? 2 or 3%, 2 maybe? Okay, what's 2% of 2 million? Well, it's 20,000. So $2 million.
40,000.
How much?
40,000.
I've been overruled twice, and I just about had a cowboy hat thrown at me. Yeah, but you know, the 40,000 sounds good as a retirement, but it's not as good as the 2 million, which most people, I mean, I think most people in America and Canada and England would be thrilled to death if they got 2 million. Take a look at all these professional athletes that have gotten 100 million and they're on the streets because they've blown it. The game is this, David. They want to have a contract with all of us, and they want some way out of the contract so they don't have to pay any of us. That is what's going on in Chicago. That's what's going on in Detroit. That's what's going on in New York City. And what happened is the banking houses of Europe have had all these contracts with all of the workers in Europe and all the workers in America and Canada, because they never intended to pay them, because they've had several false flags that are rather explosive in nature. Y2K, 9/11, Palin Dava Pickles, and they think that they can get out of their contractual obligations by scaring us all to death. David, are you scared to death? I'm not. Over to you.
No, Field, and the beauty of it is now we can be extraordinarily specific and personal and polarizing, because your ox was more or less gored being a Marine and a classmate of Captain Gerald Oconto, who died, where there's an elaborate facade for a story on their side which doesn't bear up to witness. But we now know that the people who had weapon opportunity and motive, and in many ways now I'm thinking the principal weapon of 911 was access to the foreign fugitive files, because, and that would have been through McDonald Detweiler and the Entrust public key, the British intelligence would have authorized your sister and her colleagues to access the foreign fugitive file and assemble a group of people under the umbrella term Al-Qaeda, believing or hoping the Americans would never wake up to the fact that Al-Qaeda is the word in Arabic for database. So there is no Al-Qaeda, at least in the popular sense. There's a partition of a database created by Norman Inkster and Field's sister in 1987, where she can place, for example, one-legged black lesbians. I don't know how big a community that represents, but the beauty of it is, if she ever wanted to stage, God forbid, an attack by one-legged black lesbians on Washington, she could probably get all of the one-legged black lesbians in the world to hop onto a plane and fly to Washington and convince Americans that the greatest threat to their survival is one-legged black lesbians.
Hey, David,
which is really, go ahead, Phil.
David, look at your watch.
Yeah, it's time. And so over to you.
Yeah, and also one more thing before we go. Clyde and I are talking about a possibility that in the future, and we'll talk this over tonight because we're going to a Bible study. But what we might do is when our regular show concludes, David, Clyde and I might start a second show to talk about things that are more hopeful, for instance, the promises of the gospel in the Bible. But if somebody, I don't think Mentz is here today, that's not to take time away from what you and I are doing. It's just to give everybody in our group here, most of whom are believers, and I see Mensa-Max is believing somewhere else today. So somebody else will have to put up the big red button. But I think as early as Monday or Wednesday of next week, you can expect to have a short lesson on Scripture for 15 minutes at the conclusion of each of the Abel Danger shows. And that, once again, David, that wouldn't encroach upon our time. It would just be an additional 15 or 20 minutes. And what I'd like Pastor Clyde to talk about in one of the earliest shows we do is what's written in Romans 28 to 30. So if anybody can put up the big red button for me, I think Ginger Cookie might have fallen asleep. But as soon as I come up there, see the big red button, I'll push it and we'll be done for today. And until then, David, why don't you go ahead and read the birthday. You just got a birthday wish from Scotland. Did you read it yet? David, have you died?
Sorry, I was muted. Birth wishes from Scotland. Is that one?
Yeah, that's a birthday wish that just came in. And speaking of the fly on the wall, I just had a fly in here. But I hope somebody puts up the red button. But until they put up the red button, David, go ahead and read your birthday wish.
Okay, birth wishes from Scotland. Happy birthday from the lapsed altar boy who became a professor of Trojan horse warfare. Mark Carney, the new high priest at the Bank of England, exorcised out of the RBC, is already abusing his taxpayers and shafting his altar boys. He gets $800,000 basic and $250K housing allowance. He is keeping the interest rate at 0.5% to stimulate his friends and cripple the rest of us. Is the 70 revelation a white lie? If it is true, the former professor of pharmacology wants to know what you are on and whether you got it from Lance Armstrong. Many happy returns from Scott G.
Yeah, from Scotland, G. And G is for George, and George is for Lise. And it looks like nobody's going to put the big red button up for me today, David. So what I'll do is I'll use the little red button. If you're ready to quit, I'll little red button myself right now.
Okay, thanks, Phil. Great show. Bye, Clyde, and see you next time.
Yeah, happy birthday.
And I'm going to stop the show right now with a button, David, but we'll still be here live. 3, 2, 1, push it.